Okay. Good morning. I want to welcome a fully constituted Federal Communications Commission to our subcommittee today, and I extend a special greeting to the newest commissioners, Rosenworcel and Pye. We're delighted to have you both here. You'll find the members of this subcommittee take their work seriously and are fully observant of the activities of the Federal Communications Commission, observant of the changes in the audio, video, and data marketplaces, and the need to keep the Internet free from government control, foreign or domestic. We do our research and we complete our work. I want to congratulate Commissioner McDowell for his fine remarks in Rome in June. You, more than anyone I know, have consistently and forcefully stood up for a free and open Internet. Our subcommittee has heeded your message, and thanks to the leadership of Representative Mary Bono-Mack, provided the House with a bipartisan resolution calling on our negotiators at the World Conference on International Telecommunications, WICIT, to maintain the multi-stakeholder approach to Internet governance. And while I know Chairman Janikowski sometimes has had a little less than laudatory comments regarding our work to free up spectrum through incentive auctions and fulfill the call of the 9/11 Commission by finally approving legislation to pay for and build out that interoperable public safety network, know that we're keenly interested in making sure that the FCC and the NTIA fulfill the intent of the legislation. Further, if either agency has questions about the intent of the law or identifies problems with it, the subcommittee expects to hear the specific concerns immediately. We also continue to examine how federal agencies might use spectrum more efficiently so that we can put more in the hands of commercial providers while simultaneously helping the government do its work better. I anticipate that Representatives Guthrie and Matsui, who Ranking Member Eshoo and I have appointed to lead a working group on this issue, may have questions for you in regards to government spectrum. You need to know that I and the majority of this subcommittee, and indeed a majority of the House, remain deeply committed to the cause of improving transparency and accountability at the Federal Communications Commission. Too often the public has had to turn to the courts to prove procedural wrongs at the Commission, wasting taxpayer resources and leaving the impression with some that the Commission considers itself above due process. I commend the current chairman, however, for the thoughtful reforms that he has instituted. But these are but a bare minimum, with no guarantee that a less thoughtful chairman in the future would follow a similar path. Finally, our subcommittee is very interested in making sure competitive market forces driven by empowered consumers are allowed to work in a way that spurs new technology, innovation, and creation of American jobs. Federal Communications Commission is an important player in that effort and should not abuse its power to achieve outcomes it lacks statutory authority to accomplish on its own. Again, thank you for your service. Thank you for coming before our subcommittee. And with that, I would yield to Mr. Terry for comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recognize the need to bring any and all available spectrum online as soon as possible is absolutely necessary in order to meet our growing demand. The Commission should make finalizing near-term opportunities like 40 megahertz of spectrum in the AWS-4 or 2 gigahertz band and the broadcast incentive auctions a top priority. I have concerns about the regression analysis contained in the recent high-cost order with admitted inaccuracies in the data sets used, lawsuits filed, and implementation beginning this past Sunday. I worry that what started out as an honest effort to modernize and create an efficient fund has developed into a situation in which rural America could in fact see declining service quality and higher prices. I understand that the FCC is open to proceedings seeking to comment on contribution reform, and I'm eager to hear where our witnesses stand on how contributions should be assessed, what services and service providers should contribute, and most importantly, what they understand their current authority is when making such assessments. Last, I have a few questions on a process in regard to investigations at the FCC Office of Engineering and Technology. I have been informed that a company in my district that produces remote monitoring equipment for propane tanks has filed a formal complaint alleging that one of their competitors is operating in an unauthorized band, and I'd like to know more about how the Commission considers such allegations, and I thank my friend from Oregon, and I yield back.
I would yield now to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton, for the remaining 23 seconds.
23 seconds. Well, I want to welcome our two new commissioners from the FCC to the Energy and Commerce Committee. We look forward to a long and fruitful dialogue with you two fine folks. And I hope that in this hearing today, Mr. Chairman, we take a look at your bill, H.R. 3309, the FCC Process Reform Act. I think it's a good piece of legislation, and I'd like to hear what the members of the FCC have to say about it. And with that, I'll yield back put the balance of my statement in the record and yield back the remaining 12 seconds.
Thank the gentleman from Texas. Now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Ms. Eshoo, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to the full commission. We have all 5 commissioners before our subcommittee for the first time this year. So welcome to you, and an especially warm welcome to the 2 new commissioners. Congratulations to you. We look forward to working with you. Today, the FCC is faced with an enormous set of tasks that will define the communications landscape in the second decade of the 21st century. From implementation to voluntary spectrum auctions to reforming the special access market, the FCC has an opportunity to create a more competitive marketplace supporting greater consumer choice and a more robust wired and wireless network for consumers and businesses across our country. I'd like to begin by addressing the implementation of incentive auctions. A product of this subcommittee's work over the last year and a half, practically a year and a half it took us to produce that bill, the law was carefully crafted to create new opportunities for unlicensed spectrum and ensure that rules guiding the auction of spectrum enhance competition, consumer choice, and innovation. So as the Commission proceeds with developing its rules, I look forward to discussions that will ensure that the congressional intent is closely followed. Second, the Commission has an opportunity to overhaul the special access market. As an FCC official noted last month, there is widespread agreement that the existing framework is broken. I'm hoping that I'm hopeful that the FCC will proceed expeditiously with a mandatory data request and collect the data that's necessary to reform the special access market on a comprehensive basis. This has been hanging around for a long time. So I think that needs to be really moved to the front burner. Third, in less than 30 days, the FCC's rules to place the political file online will go into effect. And I want to thank the Commission for what it has done. We have to sometimes remind ourselves that we're in the 21st century, not the 19th or the 20th. We need to go beyond wooden file cases, even metal file cases. There is an internet. Everything goes online. So I look forward to, as a longtime supporter of this action, I want to thank the Commission, and I look forward to seeing the Commission proceed with bringing the information online, and as I said, out of these cabinets that probably sit in the basement of stations today. There are many more issues I hope we'll cover in today's hearing, including efforts to improve consumer disclosure of wireless data plan terms and conditions, the impact of discriminatory data caps on future innovation, and steps being taken, and I know many have been, to expand broadband adoption. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and I'd like to yield my remaining time to Ms. Matsui.
Thank you so much, Ranking Member Eshoo, for yielding me time. I want to welcome our new commissioners, Commissioner Rosenworcel and Pai, along with our Chairman Janikowski and Commissioners Clyburn and McDowell. We love to have the full complement of commissioners here. While the FCC has a lot on its plate, one of its major tasks will be undertaking arguably the most complex spectrum auction in history. It is imperative that the process be transparent, and I believe Congress must work closely with the FCC to ensure the auction's success. As co-chair, along with Mr. Guthrie of the Bipartisan Federal Spectrum Working Group, we have another unique opportunity to work closely with the FCC, NTIA, DOD, and other relevant agencies in truly identifying underutilized federal spectrum. Our nation continues to face a spectrum crunch. As a first step, Congressman Stearns and I introduced bipartisan legislation to repurpose the 1755 to 1780 spectrum band for commercial use. Lastly, while there are some tough decisions ahead, I want to encourage the FCC to move forward with the USF reform efforts. As part of its reforms, I'm pleased that the Commission is moving forward with a broadband adoption pilot program similar to legislation I introduced last year, the Broadband Affordability Act. These pilot projects will help provide greater access to the Internet for seniors, the disabled, and lower-income Americans in both urban and rural America. It is my hope that the FCC will use the data gathered from the pilot program to implement a responsible, permanent broadband adoption program. I look forward to working with the Commission on these and other issues, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. Chairman now recognizes Chairman of the full committee, distinguished gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, join in welcoming our 2 new commissioners and all 5 of you together. It's an exciting time. We passed landmark spectrum legislation earlier this year that will indeed help kickstart our economy, promote investment and jobs, provide Americans access to new and innovative services. The legislation does it by putting more frequencies in commercial hands as the Internet goes mobile and demand for wireless broadband continues to grow tremendously. First, it requires the FCC to auction 65 megahertz of particular spectrum within the next 3 years. And Mr. Chairman, I look forward to hearing your plans for the spectrum, including the frequencies from 2155 to 2180 megahertz, which are ideally suited for pairing with the spectrum from 1755 to 1780. Second, the legislation authorizes the FCC to conduct incentive auctions in which the government shares some proceeds with licensees, including broadcasters, that voluntarily return spectrum to be auctioned for broadband services. And I'm eager to learn when you'll start implementing the incentive auctions and when you think the broadcast incentive auction will indeed take place. I also want to reinforce what we required in the legislation, that the FCC not preclude parties from participating in the auction. The FCC should not be picking winners and losers, and the more robust an auction, the more successful that it will be. I'd also like to hear about your plans for special access services. I'm glad you chose not to move forward with a draft order that would have suspended the current pricing flexibility regime, even though parties had petitions pending. This regime was put in place by a Democrat-led FCC to allow limited deregulation where the parties demonstrate the presence of competition. And as we know, we have made good process a priority in this Congress, and it would have been inappropriate to change the rules in the middle of the game. I understand that you may be redrafting that item. I'm interested to know whether you will first move forward with a mandatory data collection, as reported, to determine whether changes are appropriate, and if so, what kind. I also want to make sure that you keep in mind the purpose of the pricing flexibility regime to gradually stop applying some old rules to old technology in the presence of competition, not to start imposing new rules on new technology, like fiber facilities and Ethernet services designed for the broadband world. Look forward to hearing about the impact of the massive storm that swept through the Midwest and Mid-Atlantic region just a week ago. There were reports that phone service and 911 call centers were down for a period of time. How extensive was it? What were the causes? What can we do to stop them again? And I yield the balance of my time to Mr. Stearns.
Thank you, distinguished full chairman. And let me just also welcome the 2 commissioners. And I want to applaud the FCC for taking the steps to reform the Universal Service Fund. Any small step forward is good. Encourage you to conclude your operation and work forward. I think I'm also interested in how the FCC believes federal spectrum can alleviate today's spectrum crunch. And the federal government occupies approximately 60% of the best spectrum, which the FCC must strongly consider as it seeks to reach its goal set out in the National Broadband Plan. Mr. Chairman, I think you and I had called for an inventory during the stimulus package when you had the broadband deployment of $7.5 billion. We wanted to map it before it was given out. It wasn't. I think we should also have a spectrum inventory of the military and elsewhere to see how much they have, to possibly see how much of that is available to help the private sector. I have introduced a bill, as Congresswoman Matsui mentioned, H.R. 4817, Efficient Use of Government Spectrum Act. This is a small step forward, which we believe is helpful, and we would like to have a hearing on it. And finally, Mr. Chairman, the FCC must continue to work diligently on clearing its backlog. Part of the problem that we find across government is there's a backlog, whether it's in the Veterans Administration or the FCC. The agency is making headway. I compliment you on that, but many items that could fuel job growth and investment have lingered. Perhaps I'll just name a few without taking a position, any position on the merits of these. That's the Securus petition, ANDA's application for review, Sky Angels program access complaint, and of course the Illinois Public Telephone Association petition for declaratory ruling. I hope the FCC will look at that, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the distinguished gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman, for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and I want to welcome back Chairman Janikowski, Commissioners Clyburn and McDowell. You've been before our committee before, and I'm pleased also to welcome the 2 new members to the commission from the commission, Jessica Rosenworcel and Ajit Pai, and I'm sure both of you are going to prove worthy of the long wait you had to get your confirmation to join the commission, and we're all looking forward to working with you as well. The communications and technology industry is a source of incredible innovation, and it's an engine for national economic growth. The FCC's charge is to promote robust competition, ensure access to services for all, safeguard the American consumer, and all these become even more important as these technologies play an increasing role in our daily lives. This was certainly brought home to us as recent weather-related instances made abundantly clear. Americans rely on broadband devices and applications more than ever, and our lives are greatly enhanced by access to these critical services. When we had the massive power outages throughout the Mid-Atlantic region, it led millions of Americans to malls and coffee shops, not necessarily to seek an air-conditioned environment, shop, or drink coffee, but to recharge their phones, tablets, and computers. These devices needed to have power in large part so that they could be connected to the Internet itself. In light of our increasing reliance on the Internet, it's imperative that our communications laws and regulatory policies not only continue to promote the innovation that our nation exports worldwide, but also ensure that Americans have reliable, affordable access to the Internet at home. Earlier this year, Congress passed legislation charging the FCC with carrying out 2 critical tasks: ensuring interoperability for a nationwide broadband network for first responders, and making more spectrum available for mobile broadband through incentive auctions. And I'm pleased that the chairman has retained a world-class team to help design and implement these unprecedented auctions. I also understand the FCC is now considering how to integrate jurisdictions that had previously received waivers to build out their public safety network into FirstNet. I strongly urge the Commission to limit the potential for early builders to undermine the long-term success of FirstNet. The FCC has also taken long overdue steps to modernize the high-cost and low-income Universal Service Fund programs. These limited public dollars must be used wisely to connect millions of Americans unserved by broadband or facing barriers to adoption, and I urge you to continue moving forward with reform. Under Chairman Janikowski's leadership, you are collectively making the tough policy calls that need to be made, and I support your efforts. Special access is a concern. It's long overdue for reform. There's widespread agreement that the current deregulatory triggers are broken, even for many incumbent providers of these services, and I hope the Commission will move quickly to gather additional industry data as needed and address the potentially anti-competitive terms and conditions in special access contracts. And finally, I urge the Commission to scrutinize carefully the transactions between Verizon and 4 of the nation's largest cable companies. Serious questions have been raised about the impact these integrated deals will have on video, broadband, and wireless competition. We're hearing from a variety of corporate and public interest stakeholders who are very concerned about what these deals mean for competition. I know the Department of Justice as well as the FCC both have important responsibilities in this process and should coordinate their respective reviews as the agencies examine these proposed arrangements. And I look forward to your testimony and want to again thank you for appearing before our committee. Mr. Chairman, I want to yield the balance of my time to our colleague, Ms. Christensen.
And I'd also like to add my word of welcome to Commissioner Clyburn and McDowell, who are back with us, of course, Mr. Chairman, and to the two new members. And really want to thank the Commission for the work that you've done to streamline and make the work of the Commission more efficient and also more transparent. I'm particularly interested in the FCC's USF reform proposed changes to intercarrier compensation and its potential impact on rural service providers in territories. My district, the U.S. Virgin Islands, we're extremely concerned that the proposed cost model currently being reviewed by the Wireline Competition Bureau would reduce support for our incumbent provider potentially from $16.4 million to only $400,000. And also as a member of the working group on spectrum, I look forward to working with you and service providers to address spectrum scarcity. I know that companies like Verizon Wireless and T-Mobile are taking the initiative to find solutions, and they're under your review right now. But working with you and the working group, I know that we'll find some solutions as well. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. The gentleman yield back the balance of his time. He does. And now we'll proceed on to our witnesses. And we certainly delighted to have all of you here today and respect the work that you do. And Chairman Janikowski, we're going to lead off with you. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Walden, Ranking Member Eshoo, members of the committee. I'm pleased to be joined by a full complement of commissioners, including my newest colleagues, Commissioners Rosenworcel and Pai. I'm certain that the members of this committee will find them to be excellent additions to the commission, as I have. This is my 7th time testifying before this committee, and I've been fortunate to meet with many of you individually. So by now, most of you know that my primary focus as chairman has been promoting innovation, investment, competition, and consumers in the ICT sector. We focus the agency on maximizing the benefits of broadband communications and on harnessing wired and wireless broadband to grow our economy, create jobs, enhance U.S. competitiveness, and foster improvements in areas like education, healthcare, and public safety. Let me provide a brief overview of some recent developments since I last testified before you about 5 months ago. First, we continue to receive good news for the U.S. from across the broadband sector. The U.S. has regained global leadership, particularly in mobile. The U.S. leads the world in 3G subscribers by a wide margin, and we're leading the world in deploying 4G mobile broadband at scale. The apps economy continues to grow, and U.S. firms and developers continue to lead the way. In the last 3 years, the percentage of smartphones globally with U.S. operating systems has grown from 25% to more than 80%. And in the last 3 years, we've gone from less than 20% of our population living in areas with broadband infrastructure capable of broadband speeds above 100 megabits to approximately 80%, more than triple in 3 years, putting us at or near the top of the world. Of course, in this fast-moving sector, there are many challenges ahead, and our global competitors remain focused on broadband opportunities. So at the FCC, we continue to work to help drive our broadband economy. We continue our efforts to spur broadband build-out, including by removing barriers to deployment. Just last month, the President issued an executive order implementing recommendations of the FCC's National Broadband Plan, our Technology Advisory Council, and members of this committee, and I acknowledge Congresswoman Eshoo's leadership on this. The executive order took steps to ease access to federal roads, lands, and buildings for broadband infrastructure. It also directed the Department of Transportation to develop Dig Once policies. As part of our mobile action plan, we've taken several recent actions to spur mobile innovation and investment and free up spectrum. In March, we launched a rulemaking on a proposal to remove barriers to flexible spectrum use in the proposed AWS-4 band. We're close to completing our work to free up 25 megahertz of spectrum in the WCS band. In May, we removed outdated rules on spectrum use in the 800 megahertz band, which will help accelerate LTE. And in August, I expect that we'll continue our ongoing efforts to remove unnecessary rules hindering the deployment of wireless backhaul. We're making progress on other pieces of our mobile action plan. The Commission's working with NTIA to facilitate industry tests of LTE sharing in the 1755 to 1780 megahertz band. And of course, we're hard at work designing the world's first incentive auctions to implement the landmark recently enacted law, a complex task affecting major parts of our economy and involving many challenging questions of economics and engineering. I expect the Commission will put forward proposals by the fall and seek broad public comment. We're also on track to fulfill our obligations under the recent law that relate to the new National Mobile Broadband Public Safety Network, and we continue to work on a full range of public safety communications issues. I'm concerned about 911 and other communications outages during the recent storm in the D.C. area. This is something we are investigating and take seriously. On other matters, we're moving forward with implementation of our unanimously approved comprehensive reform of the Universal Service Fund. These reforms will finally bring broadband to millions of unserved people in rural America while putting the fund on a fiscally responsible budget. We recently announced the availability of the first rounds of funding under the Connect America Fund and Mobility Fund, and just yesterday, Frontier announced that it will be deploying broadband to approximately 200,000 unserved Americans as a result of the new Connect America Fund. The Commission is also helping tackle threats to our broadband economy as a result of an FCC-led process on cybersecurity. ISPs serving 90% of all U.S. residential broadband subscribers have committed to adopting voluntary concrete measures to combat three major threats: botnets, IP route hijacking, and domain name fraud. Working with the nation's police chiefs, we reached an agreement with the major mobile carriers to create a database of stolen cell phones, which will help crack down on the growing problem of smartphone theft. And I continue to speak both publicly and privately with my international counterparts about the vital importance of preserving Internet freedom and the multi-stakeholder model of international Internet governance. I commend this committee for its bipartisan resolution reaffirming the United States' unequivocal support for the successful multi-stakeholder model. On top of all these efforts, we continue working to make the agency more open, efficient, and effective. I've previously reported on many concrete steps we've taken to reduce backlogs and speed decisions. I'm pleased to report today that over the past 6 months, we've made additional significant reductions in our backlog, including a more than 20% reduction in items pending more than 6 months in the Wireline Bureau, and an across-the-board 20% reduction in license applications and renewals pending more than 6 months. We've also cut the average number of days required to review routine wireless transactions in 2012 by more than half. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I look forward to continuing to work with this committee to identify opportunities to unleash communications technology to benefit our economy and all Americans. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. We appreciate your testimony and your work. And now we'll turn to Commissioner McDowell. Thank you for being here. We look forward to your comments as well.
Thank you, Chairman Walden and Ranking Member Eshoo and all members of the committee. It's great to be back here. Just here 6 weeks ago, so it's good to be back. The FCC's to-do list is quite lengthy. Among the many tasks that face the agency are, in no particular order, implementing the new spectrum auction law, completing universal service contribution or tax reform, modernizing our media ownership rules, determining a path forward in the wake of the Supreme Court's recent ruling regarding our indecency policies, and turning back international efforts to regulate the Internet. First, as the Commission works to implement the new spectrum auctions law, we should do it with simplicity, humility, and restraint. History teaches us time and again that over-engineered or micromanaged auctions and spectrum policies inevitably lead to harmful unintended consequences such as interoperability complications, reduced investment, and less revenue generated at auction for the Treasury. Ban plans and auction rules should be minimal and future-proof, so no innovation is preempted by government action and no market player is excluded from the opportunity to bid. Second, to help put more spectrum into the hands of American consumers, we need to find new ways to encourage the executive branch to relinquish federal spectrum for auction, as well as help create a policy framework to encourage technological advancements and investments in spectral efficiency. That is, how can we squeeze more capacity out of currently available airwaves? Third, although the Commission has completed most of its work on the spending side of the Universal Service Ledger, we are overdue for an overhaul of the taxing side. As this automatic tax increase skyrockets into unprecedented stratospheric heights, we have an obligation to finalize fiscally prudent reform as soon as possible. Fourth, way back in 1996, Congress directed the FCC to clear away unnecessary regulations in the media marketplace as competition takes root. Although complicated by several appellate rulings, the Commission owes it to Congress, the courts, and most importantly, the American people to modernize our rules to reflect the competitive realities of the new media age. In my view, the newspaper broadcast cross-ownership rule is outdated, is contributing to a loss of voices in the media marketplace, and should be largely eliminated. Fifth, as the father of 3 young children, protecting them from inappropriate content is a high priority for our family. The Commission should act with all deliberate speed to clarify its indecency policy in the wake of the recent Supreme Court decision on this matter, and work to process the roughly 1.5 million indecency complaints, some of which have been pending for over 9 years. Lastly, I would like to thank this subcommittee in particular once again for raising the profile of the international effort to regulate the Internet. The May 31st hearing, which was watched literally around the world, as I learned from my trip to Italy recently, and it delivered a loud and clear message that not only is it the strong bipartisan policy of the United States to ensure that the expansion of intergovernmental powers over the net never takes place, but that failure to prevent this effort would harm developing nations the most. So thank you again for having us here, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you for your thoughtful testimony. We now go to Commissioner Clyburn. Thank you for being here, and we appreciate the work you're doing on the Commission. Look forward to your comments as well.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Walden, Ranking Member Eshoo, and members of the committee. I am grateful for the opportunity to testify before you today. Through a collaborative and inclusive decision-making process, the Commission is issuing rulemakings and setting policies that are creating a sound foundation for innovation and investment. For we all share the goal of promoting robust competition throughout all industry sectors, and by continuing this dialogue between the Commission, Congress, and all stakeholders, we are on the path towards fostering a vibrant and dynamic communications marketplace. The ideal communications environment consists of a host of viable competitors, constantly innovating and challenging one another with a myriad of products and service offerings. Today's reality, however, is far from this utopian ideal. There are still times when the communications ecosystem fails to properly address key consumer interests. When that occurs, the FCC is charged with playing a vital role that necessitates striking the delicate balance between 2 equally important considerations: the protection of consumers and regulatory certainty for businesses. Under the leadership of Chairman Janikowski, the FCC has worked collaboratively with stakeholders, crafting policies and solutions in response to industry concerns. And while we encourage voluntary solutions that will give the marketplace greater flexibility to respond to ever-evolving consumer needs, we recognize that this will not always take place. The Commission is justified in some instances, and the adoption of smart, targeted regulations when necessary to promote meaningful competition in order to ensure that basic protections are in place. And even in instances when the Commission must codify regulations, we make sure that the lines of communication remain open and have implemented waiver procedures so that we can take into consideration the unique circumstances of industry participants. Last October, the Commission adopted reforms to the Universal Service Fund and put it on a sound, more sustainable path. Today, with more Americans using mobile services than ever before, and with broadband now serving as a gateway by which many Americans obtain critical information and services, the fund needed to be updated to reflect modern-day realities. The reforms we have adopted will promote significant broadband deployment to millions of unserved consumers in our nation as quickly as possible over the next 6 years. Most importantly, our reform carefully balances the need for certainty and predictability for carriers by avoiding flash cuts and providing transitions so that they may adjust to the changes. Another example of how efficient progress is being made through collaboration is reflected in recent Commission action to spur the creation of new body medical area networks or M-bands. These devices, which are about the size and shape of a Band-Aid, are going to revolutionize healthcare. They are disposable, low-cost inventions that send signals to a nearby information aggregation device by way of a low-power radio transmitter. They will allow hospitals to monitor patients' vital signs, such as heart rate and blood pressure levels, without all the wires and cables that tether a patient to machines. M-band devices should also attract capital investment and spur business development and job creation as the healthcare profession and the wireless industry again join forces in deploying innovation nationwide. At the FCC, we are also committed to the equal provision of communication services to all. In addition to expanding sustainable broadband service to rural and unserved Americans, we are also tackling issues addressing those with disabilities. Congress paved the way for the Commission's advocacy of these issues by enacting the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act. Under the CVAA, 2 initiatives will come into effect this month. The first is network video descriptions, which will allow blind or sight-impaired viewers to more fully benefit from network programming. The second is a National Deafblind Equipment Distribution Program, which will provide funding for up to $10 million annually for the local distribution of communications equipment to low-income individuals who are deafblind. This represents an important moment towards ensuring that individuals who are deafblind are better able to utilize our nation's communication systems. At this juncture, I will yield out of respect for time and will offer myself for questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank the Commissioner. We appreciate your work and your testimony. Commissioner Rosenworcel, we're delighted to have you here before the committee. We welcome you, and we look forward to your comments.
Good morning, Chairman Walden, Ranking Member Eshoo, and members of the subcommittee. It's an honor to appear before you today in the company of my new colleagues at the Federal Communications Commission. I also would like to thank Chairman Janikowski, Commissioner McDowell, Commissioner Clyburn, and the FCC staff for the warm and generous welcome I received when I was sworn into office with Commissioner Pai just 2 months ago. Let me begin by noting that there is no sector of the economy more dynamic than communications. By some measures, communications technologies account for 1/6 of the economy in the United States. They support our commerce, they connect our communities, and they enhance our security. They help create good jobs. By unlocking the full potential of broadband, they will change the way we educate, create, entertain, and govern ourselves. But communications technology is changing at a brisk pace. Laws and regulations struggle to keep up. So it is important that the FCC approach its tasks with a healthy dose of humility. At the same time, I believe that there are enduring values in the Communications Act that must always inform our efforts. First, public safety is paramount. Congress directed the FCC to promote the safety of life and property in the very first sentence of the Communications Act. The Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act builds on this principle with its framework for a nationwide network for first responders. Just last week in Washington, we were reminded how vulnerable we are without access to communications. Weather-related power outages across the region brought life to a halt as wireless towers and 911 centers failed too many of us. Now the FCC must begin an investigation. It must search out the facts wherever they lead and apply the lessons we learn so that our networks are more resilient, more secure, and more safe. Second, universal service is essential. No matter who you are or where you live, prosperity in the 21st century will require access to broadband. The FCC's ongoing efforts at broadband deployment and adoption are built on this simple truth. But I believe the principle of universal service goes further. It incorporates direction from Congress and this committee in the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act, which has helped the FCC expand digital age opportunity to 54 million Americans with disabilities. Third, competitive markets are fundamental. Competition inspires private sector investment. It is far and away the most effective means of facilitating innovation and ensuring that consumers reap its benefits. Fourth, Consumer protection is always in the public interest. Communications and media services are growing more complex and becoming a more substantial part of household budgets. It is vitally important to get consumers the information they need to make good choices in a marketplace that can be bewildering to navigate. Here, the FCC, working with industry, has made strides, including with its new bill shock initiatives. But going forward, the FCC should strive to make the data it produces more useful for consumers and the complaint process more responsive to their needs. In the months ahead, the FCC will have no shortage of challenging issues to address. Let me highlight one that you are undoubtedly familiar with: the growing demand for spectrum. The statistics vary, but are undeniably striking. In the next 5 years, mobile data traffic will grow between 16 and 35 times. But let me start by traveling back. For nearly 2 decades, the FCC's path-breaking spectrum auctions have led the world. The agency has held more than 80 auctions, issued more than 36,000 licenses, and raised more than $50 billion for the United States Treasury. In the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act, Congress provided the FCC with authority to hold a new kind of auction, incentive auctions. I am confident that with the right mix of engineering and economics, the agency can once again serve as a pioneer. It should strive to do so in a manner fair to all stakeholders. I also believe that with a concerted effort, the FCC can identify ways that guard bands can support new and innovative unlicensed services, contributing billions to our economy. But I do not believe that incentive auctions alone will meet our spectrum challenge. The equation here is simple. The demand for airwaves is going up. The supply of unencumbered airwaves is going down. This is the time to innovate. We must put American know-how to work and create incentives to invest in technologies, geographic, temporal, and cognitive, that will multiply the capacity of our airwaves. We also must find ways that reward federal users when they make efficient use of their spectrum, and provide real incentives for sharing or return when their allocations are underutilized. It's an exciting time in communications. The issues before the FCC are not easy, but the rewards of getting them right are tremendous. They will grow the economy, create jobs, raise wages, and enhance our civic life. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I look forward to any questions you might have.
Thank you, Commissioner. We appreciate your comments, especially the ones at the end. We have a working group on government spectrum and would welcome any comments you may have as they continue their work. So we may be calling on you. Recognize now are you the newest commissioner? I don't know, just in the seating order here, who came last?
Technically, yes, I am the most junior member.
All right, well, we'll save your testimony for last then, but now you're on. Thank you for being here, Commissioner Pai. We welcome your comments and your service on the commission, and please feel free to go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Walden, Ranking Member Eshoo, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify at this hearing today. I've been honored to meet recently with many of you, and it is a privilege to make my first appearance before you in my capacity as a commissioner. At my confirmation hearing, I testified that a good commissioner must be a good listener. During my first 7 weeks in office, I've tried to be just that. I've held over 80 meetings with representatives of companies, public interest groups, trade associations, members of Congress, and others. Everyone, of course, has distinct views on how the FCC is doing, but there is a common refrain. The FCC needs to become more nimble in discharging its responsibilities. I've been struck by how many parties have suggested that the Commission has delayed taking action in a particular proceeding for months, for a year, in some cases even for the better part of a decade. This has been a long-standing issue. I believe we must act at the pace of the industry we regulate, because delays at the Commission have real-world consequences. New technologies remain on the shelves, capital lies fallow, entrepreneurs stop hiring, or even worse, reduce their workforce as they wait for the regulatory uncertainty to work itself out. None of these outcomes benefits the American economy or the American consumer. That is why one of the members of this subcommittee recently advised me that what was most needed from the FCC was speed. To that end, I support initiatives such as shot clocks and sunset clauses. The former measure sets deadlines for Commission action, while the latter requires periodic re-evaluation of existing rules. In different ways, each ensures timelier decision-making at the Commission, as well as a regulatory framework better calibrated to a dynamic marketplace. One critical area where we must act with greater dispatch is spectrum. The National Broadband Plan set 2 targets: 300 megahertz in additional spectrum by 2015 for mobile broadband, and 500 megahertz by 2020. Unfortunately, we are not on track currently to meet these goals. 2 years after the plan was adopted, none of the bands it identified today can be used for mobile broadband. This situation must change. One near-term opportunity is the 40 megahertz of spectrum in the AWS-4 band. Earlier this year, the Commission issued an NPRM on establishing service, technical, and licensing rules for this band to facilitate its use for terrestrial broadband. The comment cycle in that proceeding has ended, and I believe we should issue rules by the end of September. In the intermediate term, incentive auctions hold the greatest promise of increasing the stock of commercial spectrum for wireless broadband, thanks to legislation passed by Congress and shaped by the subcommittee. It's an exciting opportunity, but also a daunting one. No nation has ever held a more complex set of auctions. My view is that we should roll up our sleeves and commence a rulemaking no later than the fall. Over the longer term, we need an all-of-the-above approach to spectrum policy. We must allocate and encourage the efficient use of any and all bands that can be utilized for commercial wireless broadband services. We must work with NTIA to facilitate the relinquishment of federal spectrum. We must expedite a review of secondary market transactions. We must remove barriers that stand in the way of spectral efficiency. And we must encourage unlicensed use of spectrum where appropriate. Spectrum aside, the Commission must recognize that the country is moving away from copper wire networks toward a competitive world of IP networks. But billions of dollars of potential capital investment are sitting on the sidelines because of uncertainty over how the Commission intends to regulate IP networks. I am worried that recent hints about the direction of special access regulation, not to mention the still open Title II proceeding, are only going to further chill investment. These proposals signal to the private sector that outdated economic regulations are very much on the table when it comes to IP networks. I do not support imposing these regulations on high-capacity services because that will only depress infrastructure investment and discourage job creation. Moving to the issue of process reform, I want to thank this subcommittee for its views on improving the Commission's work. The FCC does not have to wait, however, for a law to be enacted. Indeed, we can incorporate some of these proposals now. To give just an example, the adoption of new regulations always should be predicated upon the Commission's determination that the benefits outweigh the costs. In conclusion, my goal is to work with the Chairman and my fellow Commissioners to bring communications regulation fully into the 21st century. The FCC needs to be a nimble agency that removes barriers to technological innovation and infrastructure investment, for it is innovation and investment that will result in better services, lower prices, economic growth, and job creation. And working together, I'm very confident that we can do just that. Thank you once again, Mr. Chairman, for affording me this opportunity, and I look forward to the questions from the members of the panel.
Mr. Pai, thank you for your fine words and your compliments of our work, and appreciate some of the staff hires you made there with Nick as well. Got him out of our hair. Thank you. No, he's doing a great job. We're going to start off with questions now, and I'm going to start with the Chairman. Chairman Janikowski, under your new order, the FCC's new order, television stations in the top 50 markets by August 2nd, which is 22 days away, are going to have to begin posting on a new site information related to television buys. There are questions about what's going to have to be posted. I know you've got a webinar coming up, I think, next week. But I wonder, in terms of having been a broadcaster, what's required, can you show us on your website where we could go to find what they're required to post in specificity? Because the order came out in April, I think, and the Commission said it would make a version of the political database available very soon after adoption of the item. That's been almost a couple months ago now. Lots happening, and we've got your site up here. Can you tell us? I've never been good at navigating your site, by the way. That's another issue for another day, but can you tell us, if you're a TV broadcaster in the top 50 market, where on the FCC's website you go to find out how to comply and what's required?
Or
somebody?
Sure. They're on the website. If you search for public inspection file, I think that one of the things you'll see is the announcement for the demonstration and workshop next week, which will be the primary way, in addition to the order that came out, which was quite clear, that broadcasters can learn exactly what's required. Of course, it's very simple. Broadcasters already keep records in their public files, in their stations, on all the elements that need to be filed online.
Okay.
They'll be able either to email them to the FCC or to upload them. It's a very simple process.
So will
The
this
demo next week will help elucidate.
and so that's spelled out here. It's whatever's in the public file goes up online.
Well, the order itself says very clearly what's required, as well as the press release that summarizes the order.
So is that order's available right there? I can't read it either.
My vision is, unfortunately, I can't read it from here.
Well, I guess, so if I've got an order into my station starting, well, it doesn't start August 2nd. Let's say it starts in October, but I've received it today. But the flight, I may have a couple of flights. Some may run in September, some may run in October. Some may run this month. I mean, there's a war going on out in about 9 states right now at the presidential level. What has to go up online August 2nd?
Well, again, the primary requirements are already in place. Broadcasters are already obliged to place in their public files documents relating to...
So is it the buy that's running now that goes through then? Is it the information on the buy starting August 2nd forward?
The general rule of thumb that we adopted in the order was that the implementation would be go forward. I'm not sure of the answer to your question what that means. I presume that it would mean that any buys that occur after the date of August 2nd, but that's the kind of question that will come up.
And does this include inquiries for time? Do they have to be posted up there even if a buy hasn't taken place?
Beginning August 2nd, anything that a broadcaster would otherwise have to put physically in its public file at the station, it will also have to put online.
All right.
And by the way, we found, since we did this, that companies like Time Warner made the decision a couple of years ago to just put everything they were doing online because they found it cheaper and more efficient and effective to do it. They've moved to online from paper, and we expect that as broadcasters implement this.
And when you talk about Time Warner, you're talking about their broadcast television side, not their cable side.
No, I'm talking about the cable side because they also have to keep certain files under
So the cable operator is going to have to put this up as well.
The rules that we adopted apply only to broadcasters.
Okay.
I was pointing out that Time Warner, TV broadcasters, yes. I was pointing out that
that was my point.
Companies like Time Warner have decided on their own that online is actually cheaper and more effective than paper anyway.
All right. Let me shift gears because there's been a lot incoming regarding NTIA suspension of the BTOP grants in some states. My colleague from California, Mr. Waxman, mentioned a bit about that. I'm hearing from some states, including my own, concerns about the suspension of the grants and that in some cases that may put states out of compliance with the requirement that allows them to have this spectrum, which by, I think in Mississippi's case, by September could mean you'd have the authority to take back their public safety spectrum. So I guess the question is, do you think NTIA has this authority on its own to suspend these grants? Question one.
Well, I wouldn't comment on NTIA's authority. I think NTIA should speak to its authority.
All right, but that may fall into your lap at the FCC. If NTIA suspends the grants and the state then's out of compliance, you then have the authority to take back some of their spectrum because they're out of compliance. So at some point you're going to have to make a decision whether they had the authority or not, right? So are you telling me you don't know of any authority they have to suspend these grants?
Congress in the new law did something that was a landmark step, even separate from incentive auctions, and that is finally move forward on creating a national interoperable broadband public safety network.
Right.
And the clear direction of Congress was one network, FirstNet. In addition, it asked the NTIA to take the lead on that. As you point out, we do have some pending specific issues that we have to work through. We're doing it together with NTIA, and I look forward to working with the committee.
But I guess to interrupt you, some of these states have told me they have contracts with their providers that require that whatever gets billed out matches whatever FirstNet puts out for interoperability, and yet they're being suspended.
Well, these are the issues. What we need to do now is, together with NTIA, look specifically at the waiver grants and determine how to get the balance right between moving forward, as Congress intended, with a nationwide FirstNet, and dealing with particular public interest issues that come up. The fundamental goal that we understand is a nationwide interoperable network,
Right.
giving first
Nobody
responders a chance to
disagrees with
stand up.
that. Their concern, and I'm sure you're keenly aware of this as we are, we want both. There's no question. We don't want the taxpayer money wasted. We want it built out. We want it to be interoperable. I'm being told that's what they're doing. September 2nd may be the drop dead date where they're out of compliance. So you can imagine their panic here is, what do we do? If our money's been withheld, we've been stopped, but we could be out of compliance with your agency by September 2nd. My time has expired. I flagged that for you. Maybe
Thank you.
later we can talk more. Now recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Ms. Eshoo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the commissioners for your wonderful and important testimony. Chairman Janikowski, bravo. Those were very, very impressive numbers. And as you know, I've said ad nauseum here that the United States of America should be number one in broadband, number one across the board. And I think that these numbers are really very, very important, and that we're reclaiming important leadership in what you outlined. So I congratulate you and the members of the commission. Tomorrow, there will be hundreds of people from around the Bay Area that are going to gather at Stanford University for a one-day event on the power and the potential of the unlicensed economy. You know that the auction provisions in the spectrum bill were really carefully crafted to preserve, protect, and enhance unlicensed spectrum. So my question to you is, what steps are you taking to ensure through FCC rules that will provide innovators and entrepreneurs with the regulatory certainty they need to develop the next generation of unlicensed technologies? And I have a whole list of questions, so just be as brief as you can.
I'll answer
Just
briefly.
Give me a good flavor of what you're going to do.
I completely agree with your premise, and I think it's widely shared at the FCC. Unlicensed has been an extraordinary success story. It gave us Wi-Fi, trillions of dollars of impact on our economy. And so in looking at incentive auctions, consistent with the law, taking seriously the opportunities of unlicensed is something that we will do. And also looking at the need to address Wi-Fi congestion and other unlicensed opportunities in other spectrum bands. But there's no question that the incentive auction bans provides an opportunity, and I was glad that the legislation provides some opportunity for unlicensed there.
Great. I would encourage commissioners to come out to Silicon Valley and meet with the unlicensed community there, because it's very exciting about what's going on, and whatever collaboration you can develop with them I think would be highly instructive as you move forward with your rules. This is for all the witnesses. Last year I introduced legislation to help consumers understand exactly what they're getting when they sign up for a wireless data plan. There are a lot of people that advertise a lot of things, but there isn't consistency to it. So as much as we're all looking forward to 4G without a standard definition of the technology, consumers really are experiencing, or often experience, a vastly different experience on speeds depending on the wireless provider and the location. This in turn has led to a great deal of consumer confusion. So my question to the commissioners is, what can the commission do under existing statute to help consumers make a more informed decision when choosing a wireless provider?
Well, I would just note briefly that we've paid close attention to complaints we've gotten from consumers in this area. It led to our efforts on bill shock so that mobile consumers get alerts before they exceed their data plans.
But that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about speeds.
Yes.
There's a lot of advertisement that we're the only ones, and we do this and we do that, but we don't have a standard, number one, which then leads to, companies putting out very exciting ads. I mean, geez, like it sounds just delicious. I want to grab that. That sounds like the best thing since sliced bread, except there isn't any standard, and in many ways it's false advertising.
Well, on broadband speeds, we're about to release the second of our broadband speed tests that reports on the exact speeds offered by broadband providers and compares it to their advertising. We've seen that's had a positive effect in the market, and it's something that we will...
So you're on it. That's what you're saying?
We're on that, and
You're
we'd be happy to follow
examining
up with you on the broadband
Okay.
speed test.
I just have a quick question to the two new commissioners. How can the commission better use the information that it puts out and the information that comes to it from consumers in order to make sense out of it? I mean, you issue a lot of reports. I don't know who reads them and who understands them. So how can we be relevant? I mean, it's the 21st century. We keep using that term. Do you have ideas about how, as the new commissioners, you infuse the new blood in the commission, that we can address this?
I think that's a terrific point. I think the data suggests that in the last quarter, complaints at the agency actually rose 32%. That's not because there's some bad dealings on those that provide services, but the honest truth is that communications has become a much more important part of all of our household budgets. We rely on all of these devices more than ever before. We need to start studying those complaints as they come in, and we should identify what are consistent concerns. And then we should see how we can use the existing reports and data that we produced to try to help consumers address those concerns.
And the Ranking Member, actually, I would build upon my colleague's response by saying that to the extent that a wave of complaints suggests that the Commission's rules in a particular area are lacking, we should consider actively whether a new framework is necessary to address those concerns so that complaints in the future are removed, and also to
Just don't write it the way you said it, because no one will understand it, except us here in the hearing room. Yeah.
Right, and to go to your other point you raised, I mean, I think the consolidated reporting initiatives that have been discussed in Congress would help present a single unified product that the FCC can put out that we will try our best to write in plain English so that both the legal community and the consumers and the Congress can understand.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome. Let's go now to the Chairman of the full committee, Mr. Upton.
Thank you. Chairman Janikowski, in 2003, the FCC adopted on a bipartisan basis a hands-off approach for fiber and internet protocol networks to promote investment, encourage deployment. Analysts report that fiber now passes over 22 million homes in the U.S., up from 180,000 homes in 2003. In January 2010, the FCC reported that 1,442 competitive carriers were providing service. That again is up from 536 that the FCC reported operated in 2003. And analysts report that there are more than 770 providers of fiber to the home networks around the country. So would you agree, based on that evidence, that the hands-off approach is working?
In general, we've seen, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, tremendous progress in the space and a light touch and relying on competition is our dominant strategy.
And you don't have any plans to reverse that, do you?
I don't have any plans to revisit those old forbearance.
Good. That's good. That's good. At the heart of the special access proceeding is the question of whether there are sufficient competitive alternatives in the market today, inherently a fact-based inquiry. The Commission has twice made a voluntary request for data from the ILEX and CLEX cable companies and fixed wireless companies that compete in the market with little response. How does the Commission intend to collect the data needed to proceed with its determination of whether the market is competitive?
Well, this is something I've discussed with my colleagues, and we intend to move forward with a comprehensive data collection order. We also have a sufficient amount of information, a great deal of information already to make wise decisions as we move forward.
So again, you don't plan any preemptive strike without getting all the information?
Well, we plan to steer through, consistent with our obligations under the Communications Act, to promote competition and to drive investment in new services.
Lastly, let me say, in April, the chief of the FCC's Wireline Competition Bureau said about the special access data, he said, quote, "There is an incredible dearth of data and that we need to be able to show that costs either do or don't relate to a market. We cannot do the analysis without the data." Yet a senior official in your office recently told the press that the Clinton administration's deregulatory policies for special access are not working as intended. How did the official reach the conclusion with a dearth of data?
There's a great deal of data and indeed wide consensus that the current framework for special access is not working. It's both over-inclusive and under-inclusive. We know that. We don't have the data to determine what framework should replace it, and that's what we're working on.
Okay, I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Chair recognizes the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Waxman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. With the passage of the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act and the creation thereby of the First Responder Network Authority, or FirstNet, we have an unprecedented opportunity to develop a nationwide interoperable public safety network. At the time of the Act's passage, however, the FCC had already granted waivers to several jurisdictions, allowing them to deploy local or regional public safety broadband networks that would utilize public safety broadband spectrum immediately. With the creation of FirstNet, concerns have been raised that moving forward with these waivers may undermine FirstNet by establishing regional networks that are not truly integrated and will require more taxpayers' dollars to eventually incorporate into the national network. As NTIA noted, quote, the law's vision is plainly at odds with the continuation of the Commission's pre-legislation waiver approach. If the Commission does not take consistent Congress's vision, it could jeopardize nationwide interoperability as well as harm FirstNet's ability to carry out its powers, duties, and responsibilities. Chairman Janikowski, given the dramatic change in circumstances created by the passage of this new law, what do you think of NTIA's concerns about the pre-legislation waiver approach, and how do we ensure that we are protecting taxpayer funds and not undermining our core goal of nationwide interoperability?
I think NTIA is right to have concerns given the change in circumstances of the statute, and we're working closely with NTIA to chart a course to make sure that a nationwide FirstNet could be stood up without any unnecessary encumbrances, and look as required by law to specific situations and work through them, and we're working very closely with NTIA on that.
Thank you. Commissioner Rosenworcel, you are familiar with this issue because of your previous role with Senator Rockefeller at the Senate Commerce Committee. Do you have any suggestions on how we can ensure that FirstNet is not undermined by the pre-legislation waiver approach NTIA is concerned about?
I think this is largely a challenge of timing. The Commission made some choices to provide local jurisdictions with access to spectrum held by the Public Safety Spectrum Trust early on so that they could develop local interoperability. Since that time, Congress passed a very substantial law in the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act and contemplated for the first time a nationwide network for interoperability for first responders. It's now the task of the NTIA and the FCC working together with local jurisdictions to figure out how to harmonize all these efforts so we produce that nationwide network that Congress contemplated.
Thank you. As I mentioned in my opening statement, special access is an area of policy that's long overdue for reform. Although some have argued that special access is a legacy technology that's becoming increasingly irrelevant, I'm skeptical of this argument. We've heard repeatedly from a wide variety of wireless and wireline competitors, large and small businesses, educational institutions, public interest organizations, and government agencies, that significant demand for special access remains. These same stakeholders assert that the high price of special access has impeded innovation and competition for the industry, as carriers are forced to purchase these services from their competitors at artificially high rates. We are also told that the four largest ILECs combined for over $12 billion in sales of special access services in 2010. That doesn't sound like a legacy technology just yet. Chairman Janikowski, I know that you've been a strong proponent of policies that promote innovation and investment in communication services. Are you concerned about the state of the market for special access services and its potential to stifle innovation and investment? And what information do you now need to complete this proceeding and make a final policy determination so we can resolve this matter?
Yes, I agree with your point. Even as fiber is rolled out, special access remains a very large market. You may have said this number, but it's about a $12 billion market. and even more important perhaps, special access is an essential input into competition in general in broadband and into competition in mobile. So we need to make sure, as the statute requires, that there's competition in that space. I expect that we'll move forward with a comprehensive data collection that is designed to give us efficiently the information we need to adopt a new framework for the space that promotes competition.
Thank you. Commissioner Pai and Commissioner McDowell, based on your statements, you seem to be more skeptical about FCC intervention into the special access market. How would you respond to the concerns we've heard from businesses and other purchasers of special access services that deregulation has translated into higher prices?
Ranking Member Waxman, thank you for the question. I guess I first would echo Ranking Member Eshu's call for a mandatory data collection, because I think we need to understand what exactly the current state of the marketplace is before adopting any regulatory framework. I think everyone would agree that regulating in the dark is always a dangerous proposition. Furthermore, to the extent that there are competitive problems, we should address them, obviously, after we conduct the data collection, but we should also remember that the Clinton-era pricing flexibility triggers that were adopted in 1999 also were down to the benefit of some of the very customers you were mentioning. For example, phase one of the triggers allows a carrier to reduce prices, to give them discounts and in particular cases so that contracts can be more consumer friendly. So to the extent that we would be suspending those triggers moving forward without having adequate data to know what the replacement regulatory framework would be, would, I think, be bad for everybody. It would be bad for the consumers you mentioned. It would be bad for the carriers in terms of their incentive to build out fiber.
Could we hear from Mr. McDowell briefly, Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excellent question. And for 6 years, I've been talking about this issue myself. We're past the 5th anniversary of then Subcommittee Chairman Markey's letter to the FCC of May of '07, asking us to resolve this by September of '07. I've been asking for a mandatory data collection of all market players in this space for, I think, almost 6 years. So what the chairman says in that regard is music to my ears. Then once we have that data, and by the way, the commission is on record with the Federal Appeals Court here in Washington saying that we don't have enough data to make a substantive decision just yet, and I agree with that, that pleading before the court. So once we do get that data, then there's going to be an opportunity for an important economic analysis. So for instance, if incumbents in certain markets are indeed charging far above cost, the question from an economic perspective is, doesn't that then give an incentive for a competitor to come in and build if there's a lot of headroom with pricing? Some competitors then come back to say, well, when that happens, the incumbent lowers their price. But as policymakers, isn't that exactly what we want? We want falling prices. So there are a lot of more thorny issues here than at first blush, and I welcome the mandatory comprehensive data collection so we can move forward before my gray hair turns white.
Or in my case, falls out. Let's go now to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Barton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up on something that former Chairman Waxman asked. These grants, these BTOP grants that NTIA have suspended, I think it's questionable to suspend them. And so my first question would be to the full chairman, Mr. Janikowski. Is it better to have a system that is actually operable, although not perfect, rather than a system that is perfect but not operable at all?
I think the answer is yes. What I believe the statute...
Yes, it's better to have a system that's operable but not perfect.
Yes, I think what the statute contemplates is something different, which is an operable, effective, nationwide...
well, I think you just made my point. We've got a system in Mississippi that got a BTOP grant that's about to be operational, or could be very quickly if it wasn't suspended. And there are one or two grants in Texas that are also close to being operable. I would postulate that there's a much greater likelihood that the first responder unit in Houston, Texas is going to have to communicate with the first responders in Sugar Land, Texas, which is a suburb outside of Houston, as opposed to the first responders in Houston having to communicate with the first responders in Los Angeles, California. So I think it would be better to go forward with these BTOP grants, with the caveat that they have to be able to interconnect when the FirstNet system is up and running. So they have to be interoperable with the national system when it happens. But in the meantime, it's a lot better to let Biloxi communicate with Jackson, Mississippi, or vice versa, than it is to have a theoretical requirement that Biloxi be able to communicate with New York City. And this suspension, you know, when the systems, several of these grants, as I understand it, are within months of being operable. So to go back to the original question, I believe it's better to have an operable system, although perhaps imperfect, than to have an inoperable system that's theoretically perfect, which probably won't exist for another 4 to 5 years. Do you, Mr. Chairman, have a problem with the thesis that I just propounded?
I think Commissioner Rosenworcel said it very well, I think, which is that our goal, together with NTIA and local public safety authorities, is to harmonize the various goals that we would all like to accomplish.
That's a good word, harmonize. I like that, harmonize. Good. My next question is to Mr. McDowell. Is there any place in the country, lower 48, where there is not wireless service available to anybody who wishes to purchase it?
Oh, there may very well be. There are a lot of coverage issues. Some of that's local zoning or just build out in more remote areas. So yes, but I think is the heart of your question. 9 out of 10 American consumers have a choice of at least 5 wireless providers.
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but I'm going to. I am more and more at a loss as to why we continue to fund the Universal Service Fund. And I know that the Commission has got some ongoing reviews, and I know we've got some reform proposals here in the Congress, but I'm told that almost 100% of the population has wireless accessibility at very reasonable prices, and in most cases, numerous potential providers, and yet we still are spending, I think, in the neighborhood between $5 and $10 billion on universal service subsidies that basically tax the cities and the suburbs to subsidize systems that may have once actually had a legitimate right to have a universal service fund, but in today's America, I don't think that need exists. What's your comment about that?
Well, first of all, Congress has mandated this through Section 254 under the 1996 Act.
So you're going to blame us?
Well, I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just trying to follow your
That's
direction.
pretty low blow.
Just trying to follow the
What happened to Harmony?
Would you support repeal of that section? Let's put it
well,
that way.
if Congress passes it and the President signs it, obviously we would faithfully.
That's not as good an answer. But with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Dingell, for 5 minutes.
Chairman, I thank you. I'd like to begin by welcoming all the commissioners. My questions will be largely directed at Chairman Janikowski, so I want to welcome you, Mr. Chairman. The questions I hope you will answer yes or no. Is it true that the Commission expects a notice of proposed rulemaking later this year to begin to implement the voluntary incentive auction of broadcast frequencies authorized by the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act? Yes or no? Mr. Chairman, I have tried for some time to get the Commission to share with me not only the allotment optimization model, the AOM, that it is used to broadcast an incentive auction, but also, and I believe more importantly, the variables and other assumptions that the Commission inputs into the AOM to evaluate such an auction. The Commission has to date refused to share these variables and assumptions, which is quite disappointing because I believe they should be a matter of public record. Further, such information will be of invaluable assistance to broadcasters, wireless companies, and the citizenry in general when it comes to their participation in or their approval or disapproval of an incentive auction. Now, Mr. Chairman, Will the commission make public the AOM as well as the assumptions and variables that it has put into the AOM when it publishes its NPRM to implement the voluntary incentive auction of broadcasting frequencies? Yes or no?
Well, yes, the Commission will make public all the information that's relevant to make decisions and move forward with incentive auctions.
Mr. Chairman, I hope you realize that that is liable to be the subject of a lawsuit. And if you fail to make all that information available, you may find that a lawsuit will not be sustained for want of proper information by the Commission to support its actions. Now, Mr. Chairman, the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act allows the Commission to assign broadcast channels along the northern and southern borders subject to the coordination with Canada and Mexico. Has the Commission updated the AOM using this statutory requirement as an input? Yes or no?
I'm not sure of the answer to that, so if I could get back to you, I'd like to do that.
All right, if you please. Now, Mr. Chairman, on a related note, has the Commission or any other agency begun consultations with Canada and Mexico about abiding by treaty stipulations when reassigning U.S. broadcasting channels? Yes or no?
Yes, discussions have begun with both Mexico and Canada.
Now, would you submit then for the record a summary of the issues discussed at such meeting or meetings as well as their outcome?
Yes.
Please. Yes or no?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, now that the Commission's June 2012 repacking roundtable is over, the Harris Corporation noted that 3 years might not be sufficient time in which to modify all broadcast towers impacted by repacking. Has the Commission gathered empirical evidence to support or refute such claims? Yes or no?
I'm not sure of the answer to that. The purpose of the proceeding is to gather and make sure that we have all the relevant information to make decisions to implement the Act.
Of course, we have this little problem that it has to be done, and it has to be done in a way that it is done within the time and will sustain a lawsuit. Now, does the Commission believe that 3 years' time is sufficient? Yes or no?
I don't think I can answer that. I think many of these questions have to be answered on the record that we'll eventually receive, and we'll reach out to all stakeholders to participate in that proceeding.
I'd be much more comforted if I thought you knew what the answer to the question was. Now, Mr. Chairman, my last question on this matter pertains to consultants that the Commission has retained to help it design the voluntary incentive auction. Have any of these consultants previously lobbied the Commission or otherwise advocated on behalf of incentive auctions? Yes or no?
I don't know the answer, but I'm sure that all rules have been complied with.
Would you please submit to the committee the names of those who have been retained to do this kind of work? Now, Mr. Chairman, would you please also submit for the record the names and responsibilities? Well, I've asked that question. Now, to all witnesses, I'd like to ask this. The provisions of the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act of 2012, they required that the Commission take certain steps to protect and to assure that broadcasters along the borders of the United States and Canada, Alaska and Canada, receive certain assurances that they will receive protection of their licenses and so forth. Do you all commit that you will see to it that those provisions are carried forward, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
And other members of the Commission?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, do you also commit to ensuring that the Commission's intentions implementing the voluntary incentive auction are readily available to the Congress and the stakeholders in full? Yes or no?
Yes, our goal will be, the short answer is yes, we will provide the information that we can that's actually helpful and relevant to making decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr.
Gentleman's time's expired.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your courtesy.
Absolutely. And to the chairman, the AOM is going to be obviously critically important to the success of the incentive auction. So we need to discuss how this can be done as transparently as possible in the process, and recognizing you've got to do your work. But I think there's obviously a lot of interest, and the committee has a lot of interest, and clearly the former chairman has a lot of interest. So we look forward to that. I'll recognize the gentleman from Nebraska, the vice chair of the subcommittee. Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Janikowski, yes or no? If industry was able to compress the data that Mr. Dingle is able to compress the number of questions into 5 minutes, we would have no shortage of spectrum.
Yes.
You don't have to
Yes.
answer. Yes. Yeah, I think it would be yes. I am always in awe of his ability to ask questions. Now, getting a little bit to USF, and particularly the regression order. Incredibly complex order, and I can't imagine how much time and brain power has been invested in the regression order to date, so congratulations on that. But I hear from some that they feel that the modeling used is incorrect. There's complaints about incorrect data being used within the modeling, and even around April 25th, even your own folks have said there may have been inaccurate data used in the process. So there is, at least from some outside the FCC, have been very critical about the viability of that regression order. Do you have concerns about the regression order? Are there plans to perhaps review the modeling back to the very beginning and start over? Is there another potential order looming out there? Where are we?
Thanks to my colleagues, and with your help, Congressman Terry, we were able to take a program that lacked accountability, that was inefficiently spending public money, and transform it to one that will efficiently get broadband to unserved America. And as no one's more familiar with the problems in the old program than you are. Multiple competitors in a single market getting funding, subsidizing some companies who are competing against unsubsidized competitors, and a system that gave control of the funding spigot to recipients of funding. We've ended that, and we've put in place a system of accountability to deal with things like situations where two companies providing services near each other, getting funding, correcting for geography and population, where one was receiving 3 or 4 times as much as another. And the regression analysis and benchmarks are an important part of ensuring accountability in the program and fiscal responsibility. I have great faith in our staff that's doing this. It's been an open process. I've instructed them to continue to be open to issues, concerns that companies raise, and we've shown a willingness to say, you know what, you're right about this, we will make a change. And I expect that we will continue to do that even as we move forward with implementing these reforms, because every day we don't do that, we're wasting time.
Just to maybe summarize, you're going forward based on the current regression modeling or analysis that's already been done.
Yes, well,
so you're confident enough in it now that you're going forward.
We're moving forward, and we continue to consider improvements, modifications to the program that we've adopted, including the regression analysis.
Right. Is everybody else comfortable in going forward on the current data? Then, Mr. McDowell.
As I've said all along, Congressman, this order, which was historic in nature, is iterative. And as we get data, we will make adjustments if necessary. I think the chairman agrees with that. I want to make sure that whatever we do, we don't delay or change expectations that there will be reform. From my perspective, we had a historic opportunity to flatten the growth curve on a federal entitlement, and I took full advantage of that.
Now, one other point that I hear criticism is that the cap can change every year from year to year, which is impacting their ability to do multiple-year business plans. Is that a concern to the FCC, Chairman?
Well, in providing predictability is, of course, a goal. And changes in year-to-year funding has been a part of the program for a very long time. Okay. The transition period, of course, is the hardest period. As we work through these issues together with the carriers, we'll work every day to improve certainty and predictability while meeting our goals of accountability and getting broadband to unserved parts of the country. And there still is, millions of Americans who live in areas that don't have broadband.
Mr. McDowell?
Well, I think predictability is absolutely important. I understand there are a lot of rural carriers that have a great deal of anxiety right now. I think we're trying to work with them as best we can, and we'll try to provide as much certainty as we can going forward without changing the ultimate goals that we laid out last fall.
Well, I appreciate that. And to our two new great additions to the FCC, if you ever want to take the Janikowski tour of rural America, I invite you to Nebraska.
Well worth it.
Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Recognize the gentlelady from California, Ms. Matsui. And by the way, thank you for the work you're doing on our special effort on government spectrum.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman,
leadership.
for appointing me. As you all know, the 1755 to 1850 spectrum band continues to be a priority. Mr. Chairman, you've said in the past that the 1755 to 1780 band presents a near-term opportunity to free up spectrum that can help drive U.S. economic growth and our global competitiveness. Do you believe, as a first step, we should focus on repurposing the lower 25 megahertz, that's the 1755 to 1780, for commercial use to meet demand and spur innovation?
Yes, I do. And I think that there are new opportunities, given new technologies and dynamic access and sharing, that make that even more of a reality and potentially could lead to freeing up even more of that spectrum.
So the other commissioners agree with that, too?
Yes.
Absolutely. If Congress wanted to take leadership to get the executive branch to relinquish more spectrum for auction, I think that would be terrific.
Mr. Chairman, some have suggested that we look at developing incentives to help alleviate some of the reluctance some agencies may have in repurposing their underutilized federal spectrum for commercial use. We will need additional spectrum in the marketplace, otherwise we'll lose our competitive edge in technology and innovation. As we look for creative ways to help break any potential impasses with federal agencies, are there any financial incentives or any other incentives we should consider moving forward on?
I think that could be a productive area. In the past, Congress has done things that have provided incentives. Certainly, we need the cooperation of federal spectrum holders in order to free up the spectrum we need for our commercial marketplace.
Commissioner McDowell?
I think Congress could unleash a whole host of incentives, especially on the tax side in terms of capital investment tax incentives there. So that's not necessarily the purview of this committee, but I think that could be very constructive.
Any ideas coming?
And also some sharing opportunities. Sharing discussions have been taking place, and I think that is, again, a worthwhile pathway for us to consider.
Certainly. Commissioner Rosenworcel?
The Commercial Spectrum Enhancement Act, as modified by the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act, is two important things. First, it compensates federal authorities when they relocate off of their existing allocation. Second, it provides some upfront planning money so that they can make plans for when they might have to relocate. Both of those things are good, but in addition to sticks, carrots tend to work too. And I think adding to those two things, a set of incentives, would be a prudent thing to do, and I would certainly support it.
Commissioner Pai?
Congresswoman, I would add to my colleagues' comments that to the extent that the incentives can be tailored to the particular incumbents within the 1755 band, where relocation or compression is most feasible in the short term, that would be ideal. So, for example, in the NTIA report earlier this year, precision-guided munitions, fixed point-to-point microwave, and other applications were identified as the types of services that could be moved relatively quicker than some of the other applications, for example, telemetry, where just because of the nature of the operations, it would be very difficult and or expensive to move. So the incentives, tailoring them to the particular incumbents, could get the most bang literally for the buck.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act requires the FCC to auction 25 megahertz of spectrum between the 2155 to 2180 megahertz in 3 years. Many stakeholders have suggested that the spectrum band should be paired with a 25 megahertz of spectrum between the 1755 and 1780. Do you believe that the federal government should reallocate and auction the spectrum between 1755 and 1780 megahertz in time to be paired with a 2155, 2180 megahertz block?
That would be a great outcome, to be able to auction off that spectrum as a pair. It's why we're moving aggressively with, we should move aggressively with the idea of sharing solutions on 1755. We now have an application for an experimental license from T-Mobile supported by CTIA to begin immediate testing of sharing in the 1755 band. Moving forward on that as quickly is important for precisely the reason you mentioned, which is that we have a 3-year deadline on auctioning the other. So we need to resolve 1755 quickly. The committee's role here can be very important, and we look forward to working with you on it.
The other commissioners agree with this too? Perry?
From a macro perspective, I think it's important for us to start looking at this from a different perspective. Right now, the law says that if it costs more to move a federal user off of spectrum than it would raise at auction, it's not going to happen. So let's look at maybe the cost of how much it would cost to move a federal user off of spectrum versus the overall economic effect. And I think that's going to start to tilt the scales in a different direction.
Okay. I see I have used up my time, and unless the other wants to make a quick comment? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. We now recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate you all coming. I guess I note how long I've been here when you finally get a full FCC commissioner panel that, since I started, it's all new, really. You guys are, unfortunately, that means you've been around a long time, which is not always good in Washington these days. But thank you for coming, and it's just it's always an exciting time when you're talking about communications. And I don't try to, as many of you know, I don't try to do gotchas and stuff like that. But I want to, and I say that hesitantly because I want to, Chairman, I want to talk about your new website, which I have up, which is kind of snazzy. Some people are saying it's a little more difficult than the old one, so I hope that we can address maybe some of those concerns. But I do that because I did put in, I tried to figure out and do the search, find the Title II reclassification proceeding on the site. So I just went into the search thing and said Title II reclassification, and nothing. I can't find nothing. It's very quiet. It moved me to number 2s and all this other stuff, but maybe I'm wrong, but maybe you can help me direct that through eventually. Oh, I didn't even know they were going to put it up. So, but I'm not going to ask to go any much further, but the question is the Title II reclassification still open?
It is still open. Generally speaking, with notices of inquiry, the norm is to keep them open as an option.
We can pull that down. I don't need that back up.
And in fact, in that proceeding, we've received over the last year, I think about 19 different comments. And so the norm is to keep notice of inquiries open. 19? I believe that's the number.
Is that abnormally high or abnormally low?
You know, for the 19 people who commented, it's important. And I would say the fundamental test for us is, are our policies having a positive effect on the broadband sector? And the broadband sector is moving very strongly in the right direction, and I think the Commission together has done a good job driving investment in U.S. leadership.
So you don't plan on closing that?
It would be unusual to close it, and I have no plans to close it.
So then my follow-up question, with our last hearing, or I don't know, I don't know if you had a presence here or not, but we did have a hearing on the UN ITU regulation. I think Commissioner McDowell made public comments on that. It was pretty much the consensus, I think, from the committee on both sides about the concern of controlling the internet from places. There is a concern that if we don't close down the hearing process, or we don't close down the reclassification, that there is a possible default or a movement to the government having a bigger control of the internet. Do you recognize that concern's out there?
I've heard that concern. I don't share it. I believe very strongly in internet freedom, clear and consistent position, no gatekeepers to the internet, public or private.
But you don't think that keeping the reclassification open sends the opposite signal?
I don't think so at all.
Does anyone else want to comment on that real quickly, because I got 2 more points and
I would disagree. Whenever I speak to international audiences, this comes up as an issue. Isn't the United States being hypocritical, opposing IT regulation of the net, but at the same time wanting to go into the space of regulating internet network management?
That's what I've heard.
It happens every time I go abroad.
Ms. Clyburn.
I am not in agreement, with all due respect,
Okay.
with your premise.
That's fine. Great. Rosenworcel.
I agree with the chairman as well.
Handy. Mr. Pai. And I testified in November at the confirmation hearing. I said as well in my opening statement that I would support closing the Title II proceeding in order to provide certainty to people in the industry and around the world. And then I only have 35 seconds left, and I plan to use them both, but to really make a statement, we haven't really talked about, I don't know if we have, I've been upstairs for an energy hearing, but Congresswoman Escher and I do E911, telecommunications safety, obviously with the storms, especially with Fairfax County. I hope we're looking at that and offer some recommendations and the like. And before I get to a response, let me just also make, because we talked about Universal Service Fund, and I do represent rural America, 30 counties out of 102 in southern Illinois. And I just want to put on record that Universal Service today is also broadband access and speed. It's just not cellular communications, and even in cellular communications, you may not have, you'll need multiple towers. So I hope in your consideration, we get equity in the ability of rural America to have access of speed in broadband technologies, and I think you will get some support in movement in that direction. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back balance of his time. Chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from the Virgin Islands, Dr. Christensen, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm sure it won't surprise you that my questions are going to be related to insular issues. So, Mr. Chairman, in the USF ICC transformation order, the FCC recognized that unique circumstances exist in insular areas and directed the Wireline Competition Bureau to consider those special circumstances as it implements a forward-looking cost model for price cap carriers. You also instructed the Bureau that if the adopted Phase 2 cost model doesn't adequately account for costs of the price cap companies outside of the contiguous United States, it could choose to exclude those companies from the Phase 2 mechanism and continue to provide them Phase 1 support instead. So my question is that given that Phase 1 support for the non-contiguous states and territories accounts for less than 5% of the total high-cost budget for price cap companies, wouldn't you agree that it might make more sense for the Bureau to get the cost model right for the companies in the contiguous states first, since they account for 95% of the budget, and then make adjustments for the non-contiguous states and insular areas later?
Well, first of all, I thank you for recognizing the steps that the order took to recognize the importance of the territories and the relevance of broadband access. We take that very seriously. The answer to the question is really the same in both the territories and the states. Moving forward with reform is the best way to get broadband to people all over the country and in the territories who don't have broadband today. And we have an obligation to the consumers paying money into the fund to make sure that their money is being used in a defensible way. So we will continue to listen to all concerns, including from the territories, make adjustments as appropriate. But we're proud of the reforms that we adopted, and we think they'll finally deliver broadband to unserved Americans all over the country while having the fund on a fiscally responsible budget.
Well, we obviously want to discuss that further with the Commission as we move ahead. I don't know if our new Commissioner Rosenworcel, having had experience in working with Senator Inouye in Hawaii, if you had any comments.
Well, I did not participate in the very big effort that my colleagues here did and undertook last October in reforming the Universal Service Fund. And I wholeheartedly support the thrust of that effort. I think it puts the fund on a more sustainable course, it puts it on a budget, and it makes it more financially accountable. At the same time, going forward, we're going to have to be open to continuing to have discussions about its impact on different areas of the country. And obviously that includes insular areas. Insular areas is one of the criteria that's set out in Section 254 of the statute. So I think on a going forward basis, we should make sure that we listen to the words as Congress placed them there.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, again, in the order, as I said, you recognize that unlike mainland rural company services, we're a bit different. For example, insular areas face higher costs to ship, deploy, and maintain communications infrastructure because of their remoteness and also our exposure sometimes to severe weather. In addition to that, the Virgin Islands, the Northern Marianas, and American Samoa are outside of the customs zone of the United States. So our companies pay duties on equipment and materials that come in from the U.S. as well as foreign areas. So can you talk about how Connect America Fund Phase 2 cost model could take into account these factors in producing and projecting the cost of deploying broadband service in insular areas? Would those factors be able to be taken into consideration?
Yes, we recognize that in insular areas and in some states there are unique circumstances that, in fairness, we need to take into account. We've sought to address that in the order and also through the waiver process that we set up as sort of a safety net in case our mechanisms miss any criteria that are important to take into account. The door is open for legitimate waiver requests.
Thank you. And a question on spectrum. How long do you anticipate it would take to complete the incentive auctions, both the reverse and forward auction?
We don't know yet. It's important that we move quickly, but also move in a way that maximizes the opportunities of the auction. So I think we intend to start the process very soon. We've already started in many respects, but to move forward with additional notices in the fall. And then as we get more participation from stakeholders, I think we'll be able to make a judgment on what the right time is to hold the auction to maximize the benefits.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair recognizes a gentlelady from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to thank the entire Commission for being here today. Oversight hearings like this can be very helpful for us because they give us an opportunity to reflect on where we've been and talk about where we're going. As lawmakers, our job is to constantly evaluate the marketplace to ensure that consumers are protected, that there is sufficient competition, and that the rules on the books are not unduly harming investment and innovation. We all know that the Internet has radically changed how we receive and share information. In 1996, when Congress did its first and only rewrite of the Communications Act, approximately 36 million people used the Internet, less than 1% of the world's population. The copper wire was king, and people waited patiently, very patiently, while an image slowly loaded onto their screen. But today, more than 2.2 billion people are on the web, and people all across the globe are more connected than ever before. We share and access information on the web constantly, and we can do it from the phone in our pocket. It's pretty hard to argue that the landscape isn't drastically different than it was 16 years ago. We also know that the tech sector is among the most dynamic and innovative parts of our economy. We all care deeply about jobs. But I wonder, do our dated laws actually harm innovation and inhibit investment? Too often it seems the FCC has overreached in interpreting its authority, perhaps because that authority was granted in a different world than we live in today. I'd like to ask the new commissioners, Rosenworcel and Pai, do you think these are complete opposite of Mr. Dingell's. These are multifaceted questions, and you may elaborate. Do you think the FCC has jurisdiction to regulate all IP networks? How about all fiber networks? Do you think the FCC should regulate such networks? And what is the proper regulatory framework for IP-based services? To the two new commissioners, and welcome.
I think the FCC has jurisdiction to do so. Congress, in laying out the definitions at the front of the Communications Act, speaks of telecommunications services regardless of the technology used. That definition informs the definition of telecommunications and the definition of information services. So I think the jurisdiction is present. But your question's a good one. Does that mean that the agency should then go take an extensive regulatory role? And I think the question for the agency is rules promoting competition, which can inure to the benefit of consumers, are its rules promoting universal service so that we get these services everywhere. And I think that those are the fundamentals that should really drive the agency in its decision-making at this time.
Commissioner Pai.
Representative, I share your concerns about the Commission's occasionally elastic interpretation of its own statutory authority, and even to the extent that, say, for example, Title I would broadly seem to cover IP networks. The question is whether we're being faithful to the actual language of the statute and the intent of Congress. But putting that to a side, assuming for the sake of argument that the Commission has authority, the question, as my colleague pointed out, is whether the Commission should exercise that authority with respect to IP networks. As I set forth in my opening statement, I have very serious concerns about extending the legacy economic regulations of the old copper wire networks to fiber networks. And the reason is because we want to maximize the incentives for companies and carriers to deploy more in fiber. So to the extent that additional regulations of the type that were present in the copper era are applied to fiber, that dampens the incentive for a company to deploy fiber if they know that prices or other terms can be regulated and changed, and so they don't have the certainty they need from the Commission in order to make those investments. So I take a slightly different approach to that question.
Commissioner McDowell, would you like to weigh in on that?
First of all, I think it's important to note that if the Act gives us jurisdiction over telecommunications services, that doesn't mean that we can then foist upon information services the same powers. And it's important to also note that information services, broadband internet access in particular, has never been regulated under Title II, never. So the other part of your question, which is should it be, I agree with Commissioner Pai in that we should be very careful. We should encourage the build-out of new systems. I think overall, I've said this on the record many times before, Congress should take a fresh look at the Act. It is stovepipes of regulation based on legacy technologies. It might be wireless, it might be coaxial cable, it might be copper, it might be other types of wireless technologies as well, broadcast versus mobile broadband, et cetera. So consumers really don't understand the difference. I try to look at the marketplace through the eyes of my children, and they don't see what the regulatory difference should be based on any sort of technology differential. So let's look at concentrations of market power, abuses of that power, and whether or not that leads to harm to consumers. I think that would help inspire a fresh look at a new statutory construct.
Thank you very much. My time has expired. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady, and now we recognize the gentleman from Boston.
I thank the gentleman very much. And I'd like to extend a particular welcome to our two new commissioners. Congratulations. It's going to be an exciting tour of duty for you. It's just the most exciting area in all of public policy. Yesterday, I released the findings of an investigation into law enforcement requests for consumers' mobile phone records. It's the first ever accounting of such information. The responses from the carriers are startling in both volume and in scope. In 2011, law enforcement made more than 1.3 million requests for personal information from wireless carriers, and this number has been increasing every single year. With wireless devices now ubiquitous, mobile phone records, geolocation data, and text messages have become indispensable tools in the hands of law enforcement authorities. Law enforcement should have access to this data as long as it's granted according to court warrants and appropriate legal processes. Since the transfer of mountains of mobile data to law enforcement raises a number of important privacy concerns that we have to deal with. For instance, while police are searching for the guilty needle, innocent people in the rest of the haystack may be swept up in a digital dragnet. So let me ask you, Mr. Chairman, do you think this process should be more transparent so that innocent consumers whose information is being included in these data dumps can better understand how their personal information is collected, handled, and stored?
Yes, and I think the information that you released provided a real service. If I can make one brief point on the importance of privacy, important as a fundamental value that we all care about, but also important for the success of the internet and broadband in driving economic growth and all the benefits. If people don't trust the internet and their information on the internet, that will drive down adoption and usage, and so I think you're doing something very valuable with this.
Yeah. Commissioner McDowell, do you agree?
I'd also like to thank you for your leadership on this issue. There are obviously some Fourth Amendment concerns here.
Commissioner Clyburn?
Yes, and again, I appreciate you for that, and I woke up with the morning news reaffirming your statement, and I would embrace appropriate action if need, for legislative action.
Commissioner Rosenworcel?
Yes.
Commissioner Pai?
Yes, and I thank you again for your inquiry.
Okay, now, court warrants are required before carriers turn over data to law enforcement, except in emergency situations when lives are at stake. This makes sense, of course. However, I found that there don't seem to be uniform requirements for law enforcement to furnish warrants to carriers after the emergency has passed, but while police still want carriers to provide additional data. Do you think that more certainty with respect to the legal standards in this area would be beneficial for both the carriers and for consumers?
Yes.
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 Okay, thank you. Now, law enforcement is now routinely asking for geolocation information rather than wiretaps because they are easier to obtain. How does the FCC plan to address this shift to geolocation information, particularly as nearly every person now carries a GPS tracker, their cell phone? The telephone companies know where we are.
This is an important issue. We have open proceedings on this, and our goals are to protect consumer choice, make sure there's transparency and information to consumers, and preserve consumer trust in the communications networks.
Do you each agree that this is an important area where we have to give the consumer some confidence that they're not being tracked at all times? Commissioner McDowell?
It's an important area. The FCC's legal authority in this area is unclear regarding privacy. We have a few discrete statutory areas that give us some authority, but I'm not sure, in fact, I don't think it's very expansive.
Yeah.
I have yet to review all of the comments from the providers, but again, if it demonstrates a need for enhanced interaction, I would be supportive.
Thank you.
Here's what we know in the digital age. The technology exists to track where we go and what we do, both on the internet and with our mobile devices. Law enforcement is interested in this information, and businesses want to monetize it. I think the more challenging course is to try to understand what consumers understand about this situation and whether or not they've consented
They
to
have
those
no
activities.
idea that this is a tracker. They know nothing, right?
I agree with you.
Okay. No, let me just ask one quick question. Kids 15 and under, do they deserve an online privacy bill of rights so that they're not just turned into commodities?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, yes. Mr. McDowell, 15 and under.
That's all three of my kids right there you just described, so yes, I would agree.
Yes, even though I don't have kids, yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, 15 and under. We just have to have a privacy bill of rights for them. And, you know, I mean, the longer we wait is the more these kids are just going to get exploited. And this committee has the jurisdiction, the ability to move it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Markey. Recognize
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
for 5 minutes.
Commissioner McDowell, I've called into question NTIA's March report in which it estimated it would cost about $18 billion in 10 years to relocate federal users off the 1755 to 850 band. Apparently, NTIA based these estimates on agency reporting without conducting an independent analysis. What are your thoughts on this report?
First of all, I think our friends at NTIA did their best to try to produce that report. They're completely dependent upon the information supplied to them from other executive branch agencies, and that's where it gets very opaque as to who's providing that information, what are the assumptions, what's the data upon which all of those financial numbers rely. So I think there's a lot more work to be done. The good news about the executive branch is that it ultimately culminates with one person, and some new executive orders, I think, could be very helpful in trying to focus the executive branch on relinquishing more spectrum. And then Congress could come into play by not just looking at how much it costs to relocate federal users of spectrum, but what would the economic effect, the net economic effect be of placing that spectrum into the hands of consumers through an auction.
Okay. Chairman Janikowski, there's been a lot of discussion within NTIA and the FCC on spectrum sharing with government users. The wireless industry was built on clearing and auctioning spectrum with exclusive rights. This spectrum model has created huge economic benefits for our country, Has there been any economic analysis of the likely outcomes of auctioning shared spectrum? I'm concerned about assumptions being made about a business model that will work within a sharing regime.
So in my opinion, we have to do both. We have to completely clear more spectrum and shift to commercial, but we also have to be open to the possibility that as technology has developed, sharing might provide new opportunities to add spectrum on top of that. And the spectrum crunch is so significant, I've come to the view that we need to pursue both avenues, sharing, but not at the expense of clearing.
Okay. You've also noted that during your tenure, the Commission has moved to eliminate 200 unnecessary and outdated regulations. Can you tell me which of these was the most significant in terms of moving the needle in a way that improves the climate for investment in the telecom sector?
Sure, I'll mention a few. Just recently, we removed the dual carriage requirement for cable that will free up cable capacity for broadband. We've removed regulations that limited the ability to provide wireless backhaul in rural areas. We've eliminated regulations in the 800 megahertz band to accelerate deployment of LTE. So those are just some examples of material regulations that we've eliminated.
I guess, Commissioner McDowell, do you believe that the Commission has been aggressive enough in burning off this regulatory sort of underbrush?
First of all, I think the Chairman should be commended for some of the steps he's taken. I think as we continue to look through that list of 200 or so regulations, there are a lot there that aren't really substantive eliminations of rules. I think there's a lot more that could be done. I think someday I would love for the Commission and for Congress to examine whether or not all Commission rules should be sunsetted and have to be reauthorized, because we know the facts change in this marketplace so very quickly. So just as certain bills regarding agency authorization expire and Congress looks at those from time to time, I think the Commission ought to have that sort of presumption when it promulgates new rules.
Okay, Commissioner Pai, one of the first statements you made upon arriving at the Commission was about the need to breathe new life into the biannual review process. I think you mentioned that. Can you tell us more about what you think the Commission should be doing in that with that regard?
Thank you for the question, Representative. Section 11 of the Communications Act, as you know, requires the Commission in every other year to review its regulations with respect to communication services and evaluate whether they continue to be in the public interest as a result of competition. To the extent that the Commission determines that those regulations are no longer in the public interest, we are required to repeal those regulations. Now, when I was at the Commission in the General Counsel's office in 2007, 2008, and early in 2009, part of my work involved compiling some of the recommendations from the various bureaus and offices with respect to biennial review. What I found was that a lot of staff work is involved in getting the recommendations together and sending them to the General Counsel's office, but often the Commission itself didn't take formal action or at least didn't make the Section 11 process as robust and as meaningful as it could be. So my view in the statement that you referred to was that instead of or in addition to bureau-level recommendations, it would be a terrific idea and would give the Commission a better sense of, or would allow the Commission to better calibrate its regulations to the current marketplace if a Commission-level order or set of orders, if necessary, were adopted with respect to biennial review. That would mean commitment of resources on the Commission level, of course, but I think it would also give the staff a sense that a lot of their carefully considered recommendations were, in fact, getting acted upon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stearns. At this time, we recognize the gentleman from Western Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Janikowski, Commissioner McDowell, Commissioner Clyburn, welcome back. Commissioner Rosenworcel and Commissioner Pai, look forward to working with both of you, and welcome to your first hearing in front of the committee. I just want to say very briefly, there's been some concern expressed on this committee about the reclassification proceedings leading to some sort of government censorship. I just want to say for the record, I think that's a misinformed view. Quite the opposite. I think this promotes an open internet that protects our consumers' access to the content of their choosing. But let me move on. Chairman Janikowski, we've had a number of conversations, maybe 200, 300, or 400, on special access. And I know that you're aware that the resolution of this issue is important to the industry. You've recently circulated an order that would freeze pricing flexibility pending further reform of the special access market. I fully support that effort. You mentioned here today that the FCC's pricing flexibility rules are not working properly. Would you agree that it's difficult for the industry to operate under rules that the FCC admits are broken even in the short term?
Yes, and I think the process of...
Thank you. That's
go ahead.
good. So are you planning to bring this order to a vote in the short term? And if so, when might you do that?
There's a draft order currently before my colleagues. It's something that we have been discussing and that we hope to resolve in the near future.
When might that be?
The
The near future has been since 2007, so I'm
No. This is under active consideration at the Commission, and I think you can expect some action in the very near future.
And then also we understand that you're going to issue another data request, this one being mandatory. And my understanding is that a mandatory data request is something that most of the stakeholders are in favor of. But as I said before, going back to as far as 2007, this committee has been promised multiple times that the FCC would complete the special access proceeding expeditiously. This is giving new meaning to the term expeditiously. So we've heard this all before, but what is the timeline by which the FCC will issue this mandatory data request, analyze the data, and complete this proceeding? And please don't say soon.
We expect to issue, or I expect to ask my colleagues to vote on the data collection order in the coming weeks, as quickly as it can be finalized. And then once we get the data, it's hard to predict exactly when we would bring the order to conclusion, but I think your point is a
How long
good
would
one.
it take to get all the data?
I don't know what comment cycle we'll put in that, but we will do...
Weeks, months, years?
Not years, months, and I think the process...
More than 3 months?
The shortest comment cycle... That
I'm looking
makes
at
sense.
Commissioner McDowell's head going like this, so 2 to 3 months?
Yes, or the answer is yes. We want to have a comment cycle that gets us the information we need as quickly as possible.
Okay, I'm going to get off your back at this point, but we're going to be on your back. This needs to get done. I want to talk about minority and female media ownership, too. Federal Appeals Court last year ruled that the FCC does not have enough accurate data on female and minority ownership to demonstrate that it's serving its statutory mandate to promote diversity. The court has directed the FCC to study minority and female ownership before changing any media ownership rules. In Pittsburgh, where I live, minority and female ownership of broadcast outlets has decreased rather than increased in recent years. We have less than a handful of broadcast stations owned by minorities or women. I remember growing up, WAMO-FM in Pittsburgh was a very important radio station in the African-American community for many years, and it's no longer minority-owned. What are your plans, Mr. Chairman, for moving forward with this assessment of minority and female ownership? And after you've answered, I'd like to throw that out to the rest of the commissioners, too.
Right. This is an important issue. I'm glad you're raising it. We've taken steps in the wake of that order to gather data that we need, that the court said that we need. That is underway, and we'll continue to make sure that we have the data we need to meet these objectives, which are clearly stated in the Communications Act.
Commissioner McDowell?
Thank you for raising this. This has been a very important issue of mine as well. And in December of '07, we had a unanimous 5-0 vote on the diversity order where I supported the 13 proposals, some of which got turned back by the Third Circuit here not too long ago. But one that did withstand the appeal was the ban on no urban, no Hispanic dictates. I'm very proud of that. That was the first civil rights rule codified by the federal government in about a quarter century. But we can do a lot more. I think we need to, finish the diversity studies. Actually, would be the first point of order here at the Commission, and that'll give us the factual and legal context under the shadow of the Supreme Court's Adirondack decision from many years ago to make sure what we do is legally enforceable. But we need to, first of all, provide incentives for those who hold broadcast licenses to divest them. I think Congress could be helpful by reinstating a version of the tax certificate law that was in place for many, many years. It was flawed, but it could be improved upon, and I've long advocated that. I think there are a whole host of ideas, and I know you want to talk to the other commissioners, so I'll be quiet now.
Commissioner Clyburn?
We have taken an important first step in this direction by, in essence, releasing or codifying a study of studies, and that's online for anyone's review. again, this is an important first step, and I'm hoping that we are in the process of funding and getting more robust information that is needed for us to make decisions, not only in this aspect, but in the overall ownership proceeding coming forward.
As you note, this is an important issue. The statistics right now are not encouraging, and the Third Circuit remanded these issues to the FCC. In addition, the FCC has statutory duties under Section 257 of the statute to continually look at minority and small business ownership of communications properties. And then finally, it's the right thing to do. I do agree with Commissioner McDowell, however, that the minority tax certificate program, which was in place from 1978 to 1995, was one of the most effective means of promoting diversity of ownership.
I agree that this is an important issue. As you know, the Third Circuit's decision in this case was paired with a decision with respect to our media ownership rules generally. And as the chairman has pointed out, the quadrennial process is ongoing. We are collecting facts, and I support action, ideally by the end of the year, if we can get it, in order to address these serious issues.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your courtesy, and let's get those LPFM licenses going. Thank you.
Second. Gentleman from New Hampshire is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to associate myself with the remarks of all my preceding colleagues in welcoming you all here, especially the new members of the Commission. This committee recently held a hearing on the future of video, and I believe that there was broad agreement that the video marketplace has changed significantly since the passage of the 1992 Cable Act. Chairman Janikowski, tens of thousands of New Hampshire residents woke up this morning to a blue screen due to a retransmission consent impasse between Time Warner Cable and Hearst. As a result, our state's only full-power network-affiliated broadcast station went dark on Time Warner Cable. Mr. Chairman, you and I have corresponded over the past year, in fact, one instance in particular just before the Super Bowl, regarding how consumers should not be harmed during these negotiations and why I think it is essential that the Commission complete its review of the retransmission consent rules expeditiously. What is the scope of the agency's authority on this matter, and when will you be completing your proceeding so that Congress may act accordingly?
I share your concern about the issues, particularly the effects on consumers. As I said before, the Commission's authority under the old laws are limited, and I've said that we'd look forward to working with the committee on whether the retransmission consent provisions should be updated as a result of changes in the marketplace. It's obviously an area that we continue to monitor. So it's an area that I look forward to working with you in the committee.
When will you be completing your proceedings? So that I'll repeat my question: is there any timeline here?
If I could, I'd like to get back to you on that. But our options are limited, and I wouldn't say that that should hold up any inquiry by the committee into changing the law, because we've stated fairly clearly the limited nature of our ability to intervene under the current statute.
So the scope of your authority on this matter, you think, is limited, very limited?
Yes.
Okay. Ericsson recently estimated that by 2017, worldwide mobile broadband subscriptions will grow to 5 billion. And with the evolving use of devices, mobile data traffic will grow 15 times over. Recognizing the significance of efficient spectrum deployment to consumers, our nation's economy, and our global competitiveness, this committee and Congress passed bipartisan spectrum reform legislation earlier this year, which we know. Acknowledging that spectrum from incentive auctions is a ways off, I believe that it is vitally important that we firstly bring federal spectrum to market in a responsible manner, and secondly, ensure that an efficient secondary market occurs. You've answered the issue about relocation cost estimates. They were asked by Mr. Stearns and somebody else preceding him. But regarding the secondary market, and without opining on any particular matter, shouldn't the FCC be treating spectrum swaps and sales with timely, predictable, and reasoned evaluation as a clear means of alleviating near-term spectrum shortage?
Yes, and we've processed hundreds of secondary market transactions over the last few years. Our pace of reviewing those transactions is increasing, and I agree with you on its importance.
Any others, Mr. Kant?
Absolutely, I agree 100% that we need to continue to make our secondary spectrum markets as vibrant as possible. The best way the Commission can help is for speedy review and approval of transactions.
Okay. Commissioner McDowell, Chairman Janikowski stated in his opening statement that the U.S. has, quote, regained global leadership, particularly in mobile, under his leadership. When and how did we lose that leadership in global?
Well, I appreciate his enthusiasm and his optimism. I don't think we ever lost it. I think we've always been the leader in mobile ever since Marty Cooper invented the cell phone in 1973. We never lost it.
Very well. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Since the gentlelady from Illinois is not part of the subcommittee, we're going to finish with those that are. So, know you're there. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for calling today's hearing on the oversight of the FCC, and I'd also like to welcome Chairman Janikowski and all the commissioners. In particular, I would like to welcome the two newest members of the FCC commissioners, Rosenworcel and Pye. Welcome, indeed. In a May 13, 2011 hearing before this subcommittee on process reform at the FCC last year, Chairman Janikowski testified that the FCC is, quote, committed to clearing out the backlogs, unquote, and that it has reduced the pending number of broadcast applications by 30%. Earlier this year, the House passed H.R. 3309, the FCC Process Reform Act. That legislation was the product of stakeholder input that will create more regulatory certainty and will make the commission work in a more efficient manner. Believe me, I've got a question in all of this. I appreciate Commissioner Pye's testimony in which he stated that the FCC must act with the same alacrity as the industry we regulate. Unfortunately, despite these comments, Chairman Janikowski's testimony, and the inaction by the Senate on H.R. 3309, the Commission is still riddled with process flaws that cause significant delays for an ever-changing industry. I would like to spend the remainder on this very issue that has impacted companies in my home state of Georgia as examples of why statutory process reform is desperately needed at the FCC. In 1999, 13 years ago, WTHC CD 42, the Atlanta channel, filed an application for Class A status along with 6 other stations across the Southeast. Due to some clerical errors in the application, the Atlanta channel's application was the only one of the 7 that was denied. In 2000, the Atlanta channel filed an appeal that is still pending before the FCC. Recently, I, along with my Georgia Republican colleagues, you also got letters from the Democrats in Georgia, sent a letter to Chairman Janikowski asking the Commission to approve the Class A status for the Atlanta channel, which has yet to receive a response. Mr. Chairman, I want to ask unanimous consent to include the letter in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that this example is precisely why we need to ensure that process reform is a priority for the Commission, because this industry is at the cutting edge of innovation and companies should not be forced to wait 12 years to receive an answer from the agency that regulates them. Here's the question. Chairman Janikowski, based on your previous testimony before the subcommittee and the recent congressional inquiry, yes or no, will you commit to resolve this year the pending appeal from the Atlanta channel that has been before the Commission since Bill Clinton was in the White House?
Well, I commit to resolving it as quickly as possible. I'm not familiar with the details, but I certainly agree that no one should have to wait that long for a decision.
And the answer is yes.
If there's any way to do so, yes.
Chairman, I thank you and the other members of the Commission. Chairman McDowell?
I agree to commit the Chairman to working very quickly on that application. Yes, sir.
Chairwoman Clyburn?
Thank you for the promotion.
Commissioner Clyburn.
And again, I will work with the chair.
And I thank you for that commitment. And Commissioner Pye and Commissioner.
Yes, nobody should have to wait that long.
Yes. Well, hey, that's great. I don't know whether I use more of my allotted time or less of my allotted time, but with that response, I thank all 5 of you, and I thank you for being with us today and giving testimony on process reform. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you for yielding back. Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to welcome our 2 new commissioners and enjoy working with you guys. I have a question. I'm the co-chair of the Government Spectrum Working Commission with Ms. Matsui, and have worked pretty closely with Secretary, I guess, the Deputy Secretary Strickland, and I think we're trying to work to move forward. But I have a couple of questions, and I know that the NTIA oversees that, not you. But Commissioner McDowell, I just wanted to, maybe some of your experiences, and there was a March report in 2012 that on the 95 megahertz between 1755 and 1850, that the estimated cost to restack that is $18 billion. That's what the estimated cost came in, is $18 billion to clear it and repackage it. And in the past, I know estimates like this have been wildly exaggerated, and they come far under cost what's been estimated. So just kind of get your opinion on that. The other thing, too, in your opinion, is it seems that it's coming out of NTIA that they think sharing is probably the best way to clear and repack the spectrum. So it looks like we have high costs to repack, and we're probably in spectrum. What I understand, if it's shared, it's probably going to be the least valuable if it's shared as opposed to clear spectrum. So we're going through an exercise to try to free up government spectrum, but we're looking at estimated high costs, offering probably the lower value for our people who want to buy it or purchase it, and it just seems like that's not a good way to go. And I just want to see your experience in the high costs and the sharing, and if you'll just share some of your experience. I know we have a vote coming too, so.
Sure, no, and thank you for coming at that issue from a slightly different angle too, which is, first of all, we have no way of knowing if that $18 billion figure is real, how real that is. We don't know what the underlying data is.
But your experience, they've been higher.
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, these are executive branch numbers. We're an independent agency. We don't have any reach into the executive branch. So we don't really know. And NTIA has to rely on information given to it from other agencies, so I don't want to fault the good people who work there.
Exactly. And we've worked well with Deputy Secretary.
Right. So they're given what they're given, and they have to spit out the numbers that they're given. And but beyond that, we can't drill down any deeper. And there's a disincentive, a strong disincentive for any user of spectrum or holder of a license, be they private sector or public sector, to relinquish that license. And that's going to be especially true of the federal government. So we have to ask a fundamental question, which is, are all agencies of the federal government using all of their spectrum efficiently? I think the answer to that question is probably no. That's a hypothesis, but we don't really know because there's never been an exhaustive audit or exhaustive study in that regard. I think one is needed, but that's going to take leadership directly probably from the West Wing of the White House, from the Oval Office. You have a vast executive branch bureaucracy here regarding operators and users of spectrum, but it does culminate with one person. And I think this translates across who's been in the White House over the years. It's not a partisan issue, but the president, with executive orders that are clear and defined, could resolve this issue. So thus far, it's sort of muddled. So here we are into a bit of a cul-de-sac, a bit of a dead end, which is we need spectrum. The broadband plan calls for 500 megahertz to be auctioned. I'm skeptical that the incentive auction legislation will produce 80 megahertz. It's also a matter of 80 megahertz where. Is it going to be in the most congested urban areas or where it's less needed in rural areas? And then so if you look at the federal government occupying perhaps 60% of some of the best spectrum, that is perhaps some very low-hanging fruit right there. But again, that takes executive branch leadership to get that moving. So then Congress has a role here, which is there's a law that says if it costs more to move a federal user than off the spectrum than it would raise at auction, that it's not going to be auctioned. So do we need to reformulate that? Do we need to look at the net economic effect of that spectrum? Do we need to look at that whole problem through a different lens? And I think we do, but we're at a dead end right now. We're not going to get the 500 megahertz that the National Broadband Plan talks about. Consumers are going to be frustrated for years, and even if we could find spectrum today, it does take the better part of a decade before it actually reaches the hands of consumers, just because of due process and funding and build out and all the rest. So we're looking at a real drought for spectrum right now, absent some quick action and leadership.
Yeah, it's been an interesting thing for me, eye-opening for me, and I think not many people understand, and I still don't understand exactly how it all works, but the process about how we need to get spectrum out there, because it's our competitiveness as a country, and And I was always kind of joking since I've been doing this task force, I never ran around Kentucky saying, send me to Washington and I'll get you more spectrum. That was never in my platform moving forward, but I've been enjoying doing it because it's an extremely important thing that we need to do and be very serious about, because we have uses and everything going forward that we have to have spectrum for.
Well,
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Guthrie. At this time, since there's no other members from the subcommittee, I'm able to recognize the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Janikowski.
Mr.
You're
Chairman, I
recognized for 5 minutes.
appreciate your allowing me to just ask one short question. Chairman Janikowski, the FCC, let me begin with a compliment, I believe has done an impressive job under your leadership of improving the responsiveness and increasing efficiency. The Commission's significant reduction in the number of open dockets is particularly impressive. However, there are several pending petitions which we've been hearing about filed by state payphone associations requesting the FCC to order a remedy for violations of previous FCC orders that are still awaiting decisions. I previously asked about one specific petition submitted by payphone operators in Illinois. It's now 8 years after that petition was filed. So I'm asking what specific efforts have been made in recent months to reach a final decision on the outstanding payphone petitions? What will be done in the near future to bring this issue to a conclusion? And can you say when final orders on those petitions will be completed? And from my point of view, particularly the Illinois petition.
So thank you for your comments, and I appreciate you drawing attention to that proceeding. There is a draft order in that proceeding that is before the other commissioners, and I can't speak for them, but I would expect that we'll see action on that in the near future.
Since it's now dependent on the others, might comment on that.
You know, I graduated from law school in 1990, and one of my first projects was to work on a payphone matter before the FCC when I was in private practice. And what tends to happen is that the FCC will act, it goes to an appellate court, it goes back down to the FCC, several years in between actions, and this has been going on literally in my 22 years of practice and work in this area. But I do think we should get to work on all matters that are easily decidable, and agree with the chairman with his answer.
Okay, anyone else?
My office will continue to do all that it can to expedite this process.
Thank you.
Yes, we should get to work.
I have aggressively reviewed the list of orders on circulation and have tried to vote them as quickly and as possible, and I will take a particular look at this order and to take the appropriate action within a very short period of time.
Pretty soon no one alive will remember payphones, so I hope that we'll be able to resolve this very soon. Thank you so much. And Mr. Chairman, again, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kinzinger will now take over. He voted. Yeah. You guys just sit there, be calm.
Thank you, and the chair now recognizes himself for questions. This is what you do: you go vote early, and then then you can pretend like you're the chairman for a few minutes. From everybody's written testimony, many of you talk about spectrum controlled by the federal government. As a military pilot, I understand and agree that certain agencies and departments have critical needs, which must be prioritized in the realm of communications availability. I've also realized in my short time here that the federal government isn't exactly the model of efficiency. I know that doesn't surprise too many people. I was happy to see the FCC and NTIA initiate some plans to free up spectrum in the 1755 band, but I believe there's more we can do to move this conversation along in the meantime. To take a page from Commissioner Pai's testimony, sometimes you just have to get the first run across the plate to get the ball rolling. That being said, I've been working with Senator Kirk's office to do just that by introducing legislation which would relinquish federal spectrum through a BRAC-style commission. It's H.R. 4044. Now, everyone has their own opinion on how federal spectrum should be reallocated, but it's my hope that I'll be able to work with each of you here today on a way forward, and that we'll be willing to talk about those ideas. And that if any of you have anything on the subject that you'd like to talk about, hopefully we can do that as we move forward. This is an extremely important issue, and I believe we can solve it if we start working together now. Now on to my questions, and this is just fairly quick here, if I can find them. There we go. I guess this was touched on a little bit already, but through the various, to the whole panel, I'd like to ask this question. Through various proceedings, the FCC has stated that the Communications Act is technologically neutral. Do each of you continue to hold that view?
Yes. Fundamentally, yes.
Okay, next.
If you mean does it treat all technologies the same, I think the answer is no. It's very stovepipey, to invent an adjective, in nature. So, as I stated earlier, whether you're a copper-based common carrier or a wireless provider or a broadcaster or providing a service over coaxial cable or over some other medium, the law will look at you differently rather than through the eyes of the consumer. So, no, I don't think it is technologically neutral.
I think in terms of our engagement and recognition of an ever-evolving marketplace, in terms of how we evaluate these technologies, we take as neutral a stance as possible.
We should try to take as neutral a stance as possible, but we should also acknowledge some of the direction that Congress provided in the statute, which does, on occasion, treat, for instance, local exchange carriers, cable operators, and wireless licensees differently.
Okay. Mr. Pai?
Our goal certainly should be technological neutrality. The problem, as Commissioner McDowell identified, is that we are compelled to apply statutory requirements that in some cases predate the very industries we purport to regulate by decades.
Okay. Chairman Janikowski, the FCC issued a report claiming it eliminated some 200 rules. How many of those rules were regulations that were still in force that you used your discretion to eliminate?
I don't know the number. I'd be happy to get that.
Can you give me an estimate, like if you had to ballpark it?
I'd hesitate to do that, but I would also point out that that list underestimates actions we've taken to modify regulations to reduce their impact in a way that wasn't a complete elimination, so we didn't include it on the list.
So of the 200, maybe you'd be able to tell me how many had already been invalidated by a court? Do you know the answer to that?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. And you'd be able to get that to me, I hope.
Sure, absolutely.
And how many, and I'll ask you this too, how many had already expired is another question I'll have, and I assume you probably can't answer that here. How many of these were simply cross-references to other bills is another question I'd like answered on that, or cross-references to other rules, I'm sorry. And if you're really going to meet President Obama's challenge to deregulate, don't you need to review all your rules with the presumption that the rule is unnecessary unless the Commission finds compelling evidence to the contrary?
Well, we do regular reviews, biennial reviews of all of our rules. I think our record on eliminating unnecessary rules is very good. We've also adopted rules that are necessary to promote competition, like our broadband data roaming rule. We don't always agree on all of these things, but I think we've made a very strong effort to eliminate unnecessary regulations and at the same time to fulfill our responsibilities under the statute.
Mr. McDowell, do you have any input on that at all?
Well, first of all, sections of the statute such as Section 10, Section 11, which apply only to telecommunications providers, it would be great if we had a mandatory look-see of all rules, regardless of what kind of company they apply to. So I think that could be very helpful. And as I stated before, the FCC could look at sunsetting its rules to revisit them after X number of years because the marketplace does change so quickly. I haven't looked at all of the chairman's rules that he says have been taken off the books, and I want to give him credit for at least taking those steps, and we have worked together on many eliminations. There are a number that are cross-references or that were struck down by courts, such as broadcast flag, or haven't been enforced in a long time, such as the fairness doctrine and things like that. So I think we should look at that, with the best of spirit and credit due, but also to understand that we could do better and be more aggressive in terms of scrubbing the Code of Federal Regulations and reducing its volume.
Agreed. With that, I'll yield back. Members have 10 days to submit material for the record, and we will now adjourn. By the way, thank you, everybody, for coming out and spending the time with us. We appreciate it, and we'll go ahead and adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right.